Imagine lying down at night, not with your heart racing or your thoughts spinning, but with a deep sense of peace. Imagine closing your eyes and feeling like, finally, you can let go of the pressure, of the fears, of everything you couldn't control during the day. What if, while you slept, your mind was learning how to be calm? What if your anxiety wasn't something you had to fight, but something you could gently release, little by little, breath by breath? But let's be honest. How many nights have you spent staring at the ceiling, your chest tight, your thoughts jumping from one worry to the next? How many times have you wished for a pause button for your mind, your emotions, your stress? The truth is, anxiety doesn't just attack during the day. It follows us into the night. It whispers when the world is quiet. It steals our rest. But tonight, that can change. In this audio, you're going to experience over 3 hours of powerful Buddhist wisdom designed to help you let go of anxiety, not by force, but with understanding. These aren't just calming words. They are teachings that have helped millions find freedom, not just in their minds, but in their lives. And here's the best part. You don't need to do anything. Just listen. Let the words wash over you. Let the ancient teachings slowly rewire how you see your thoughts, your fear, and even yourself. So before we begin, make a simple promise to yourself. Say it silently, or if you can, write it in the comments. Tonight, I choose peace. I choose to heal. I am ready to let go. You're not just saying a phrase, you're giving your mind new instructions. With repetition, that message goes deep, and when it goes deep, healing begins. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let the journey begin. This could be the most peaceful night you've had in a long time. Some nights, the weight in your chest doesn't feel like fear. It feels like confusion, like your own thoughts have turned against you and you don't know which one to follow. Some thoughts feel urgent, some feel true, some are just noise, but they all pull you in different directions. It becomes exhausting, not because of what's happening in your life, but because of how your mind keeps reacting to everything, even when you wish it could just stop. And maybe you've tried to distract yourself. Maybe you've repeated mantras or watched videos or counted your breath. But the tension doesn't leave, because deep down, you don't just want relief. You want freedom. You want a different relationship with your own mind. That's where the ancient Buddhist teaching of Yoniso Manasikara, or wise attention, quietly begins its work. Wise attention isn't just thinking positively. It's not forcing yourself to be calm. It's not ignoring reality. It's learning how to place your attention where it truly helps and stop feeding the thoughts that make you suffer. Not every thought deserves your focus. Not every emotion deserves your belief. And once you understand how attention shapes your entire mental world, anxiety begins to lose its grip. The Buddha didn't just say, "Don't worry." He taught people to look clearly. And when anxiety arises, wise attention gives you a choice, not between good and bad, but between reactivity and clarity. Let's explore how. The first thing to understand is this. Your attention is not neutral. Where you place it, what you feed with it, grows, and what you ignore weakens. This might sound simple, but it's the foundation of mental freedom. Attention is not just passive observation. It's like sunlight. Whatever you point it toward, you energize, and anxiety thrives on untrained attention. Think about how quickly an anxious thought multiplies. One small worry, what if I mess this up, becomes 10 others. Why do I always do this? What will people think? Why can't I stop thinking? Now, the original worry isn't even the problem. It's the spiral you've fallen into. That spiral begins with unwise attention, attention without awareness, attention that clings instead of questions. Wise attention is different. It notices the thought, but doesn't chase it. It observes the feeling without collapsing into it. It's not cold or distant. It's curious. Curious about how the mind moves, how sensations shift, how stories form. And when curiosity replaces judgment, fear starts to soften. In Buddhist psychology, yoniso manasikara is not optional. It is essential. Without it, the mind keeps falling into its old patterns: rumination, avoidance, self-blame. And each of those habits becomes a loop. But attention, directed wisely, breaks the loop, not by attacking it, but by seeing it clearly from the inside. This kind of attention doesn't suppress emotion, it illuminates it. And when fear is brought into the light of clear seeing, it changes. You realize fear is not solid. It's not fixed. It's not who you are. It's a visitor, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, but always changing. And if it's changing, it's not permanent. If it's not permanent, it's not worth clinging to. And if it's not worth clinging to, you can let it go. But how? Not by wishing, not by resisting. You let go by seeing deeper. The Buddha once described two kinds of attention. One kind leads to suffering, the other leads to freedom. One kind feeds confusion, the other brings insight. And the difference between the two is not in what you're looking at, but how you're looking. Let's say a thought arises, I'm not good enough. If you look at it with unwise attention, you might believe it. You might replay every failure. You might feel it as truth. But if you bring wise attention, the same thought becomes an object of study. Not, is this true, but where did this come from? How does it feel in the body? What happens if I let it be without feeding it? That shift is powerful. Suddenly, you're not in the story anymore. You're observing it, not dissociating, disentangling. And in that space, anxiety loses the fuel it needs to survive. Wise attention works in layers. At first, it helps you interrupt reactive thoughts, but with practice, it begins to reveal the patterns underneath, the hidden assumptions, the old memories, the subtle fears that drive so much of your reactivity. You begin to notice how certain moods make certain thoughts seem more true, when really they're just louder. For example, anxiety often brings the illusion of urgency. Everything feels like it needs to be fixed now, but with wise attention, you see the urgency for what it is: a sensation, tight chest, racing mind, fast breath. That's it. You realize you don't have to believe the urgency just because you feel it, and that simple insight can open the door to calm. This attention also helps you see how thoughts pull the body into tension. That clenching in your stomach, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from the story you were playing 5 seconds ago. And once you know that connection, story to tension, you can stop rehearsing stories that hurt you. You can choose to place your attention on something steady, something neutral, even something beautiful. That's not avoidance. That's wisdom. There's a phrase in the teachings, "What one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of the mind." This isn't just poetry, it's mechanics. Your brain literally rewires itself based on what you repeatedly focus on. That means every moment of wise attention is not wasted effort. It's building a different future. A future where anxiety is not your home, but a passing cloud. And what happens when you practice this over time? You don't just get better at noticing thoughts, you get better at not reacting to them. You learn to pause, you learn to let go. You start recognizing that not all thoughts need a response. You can watch the waves without jumping into every one, and that is freedom. Now, let's talk about the deeper layer. Because wise attention doesn't just look at thoughts, it also looks at the one who's having them. And this is where the magic happens. Anxiety often builds around the belief, "This is my fear, I am anxious, something is wrong with me." But with wise attention, you start to see, these thoughts come and go. These feelings arise and pass. So where is the me in all of this? You realize the thoughts are not you. The emotions are not you. The sensations are not you. They're happening in awareness, but they are not your identity. This is not detachment. This is insight. You are not the storm. You are the sky it passes through. And when you stop identifying with every mental movement, anxiety loses its power to define you. You may still feel it, but it doesn't consume you. It becomes a part of experience, not a prison. Now here's something that's rarely talked about. Attention is not just what you focus on, it's also what you turn away from. Many times, anxiety grows because we keep turning away from what scares us. Not directly, but subtly. We distract. We overthink. We try to control. All of this is a form of avoidance. Wise attention turns back toward the fear, not aggressively, not harshly, but gently, with kindness, with patience. It says, "Let me see you, fear. Let me understand you." And in that willingness to look, the fear begins to dissolve. Because fear is often not what it seems. Sometimes it's just sadness that hasn't been heard. Sometimes it's a memory that never got to heal. Sometimes it's just energy, tight, buzzing, intense, but not dangerous. When you bring attention with gentleness, you start hearing what the anxiety has been trying to say beneath the noise. And often, what it's saying is this: I want to feel safe. And here's the good news. You can create that safety, not by controlling life, not by fixing every problem, but by training attention, by choosing to meet your experience with care. You learn to anchor yourself, not in perfect circumstances, but in present awareness. Some nights, that might mean just staying with the breath, not to escape, but to stabilize. Other nights, it might mean placing your hand on your heart and saying, "I see you. I'm here with you." That is wise attention too. It's not always about insight. Sometimes it's about kindness. Because wise attention is not cold analysis. It's loving clarity. It sees through illusion without rejecting the one who's caught in it. And that kind of seeing, it heals, quietly, slowly, but deeply. So tonight, as your mind starts to settle, let yourself trust that the way you look matters, that how you relate to your inner world changes what grows there. Let go of the fight. Let go of the story and return to this moment. Not to fix it, but to see it. Not to chase peace, but to rest in awareness. Because right now, in this quiet space, you're not broken, you're not lost. You're learning to see differently. And sometimes, that's all it takes to begin again. And yet, even when we begin to see clearly, even when we learn to place our attention wisely and soften the grip of anxious thinking, something deeper can still stir quietly beneath the surface. A doubt, a weight, a question that keeps returning in new forms. Why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong? Am I being punished for something? This layer of anxiety isn't about the present moment. It's about meaning. It's about cause and effect. And when that understanding is twisted or misunderstood, suffering grows quietly in the shadows. Many people carry a hidden belief that every painful experience in their life is the result of some mistake they made, perhaps in this life, perhaps in some past one. They may not say it aloud, but it shows in how they treat themselves, in the shame they carry, in the guilt they hide, in the sense that life is some kind of moral scoreboard. This misunderstanding of karma or karma is not only common, it's harmful, because when we don't understand the truth of cause and effect properly, it doesn't just confuse us. It turns our own suffering into a story of personal failure. Karma in the Buddhist teaching is often misunderstood as some kind of divine punishment or cosmic reward system. But that is not what the Buddha taught. Karma is not fate. Karma is not judgment. It is cause and effect. It is action and result. Nothing more, nothing less. But that's what makes it powerful and gentle at the same time. When you act with intention, you plant a seed. That seed may grow quickly or slowly, or not at all if conditions don't support it. But it's not personal. It's natural. Just as planting a mango seed doesn't guarantee you'll eat mangoes next week. Actions take time to ripen, and many other conditions affect the result. So when pain arises, it doesn't mean you did something wrong. It simply means that causes and conditions have come together to create this moment. That's all. The moment does not have to mean anything about your worth. This understanding brings a quiet freedom. Because when you let go of the belief that your suffering is a punishment, you stop adding a second layer of pain, the layer of guilt. And without guilt, you can actually be present with what's happening now, without spiraling into shame or confusion. But still, some people ask, if karma is real, then doesn't that mean I deserve what's happening? This question itself comes from a misunderstanding of the teaching. The Buddha never said, you deserve your suffering. He said, all things arise based on causes and conditions. That includes your thoughts. That includes your emotions. That includes the environment you're born into. Most of those conditions are beyond your control. You didn't choose your family, your culture, your genetics, or the majority of your early experiences. And yet, they shaped how your mind works today. So where is the space for blame? Right. Understanding of karma removes both arrogance and shame. It helps you see no one is above suffering and no one is cursed by it. It's not about blame, it's about responsibility. The difference is subtle but deep. Blame freezes us in the past. Responsibility gives us power in the present. With right view, we stop asking, why did this happen to me? and we start asking, what can I learn from this? How do I move forward skillfully from here? And that's what the Buddha was pointing to all along. Not a system of rewards and punishments, but a law of natural unfolding. When we think in terms of, I must have done something bad, we reduce this vast, interdependent life to a small, self-centered narrative. But wise reflection opens the view. Maybe this pain is not here because you failed. Maybe it's here because the conditions for it came together. And now, your choice is how to meet it. This turns anxiety from something to fear into something to understand. Instead of spinning in thoughts like, will this keep happening? Or, is the universe against me? You come back to simplicity. This moment is the fruit of past causes. My response now is planting the seeds for the next. And when you really take this to heart, your anxiety changes shape. It no longer feels like a trap. It becomes a teacher. You begin to notice how certain habits of mind, judging, avoiding, overthinking, create more agitation, and how other habits, pausing, breathing, being kind, start to shift the tone of your experience. You become less reactive, not because you're suppressing emotion, but because you're learning what actions support peace. The mind quiets not by force, but by understanding. You see how you've been feeding the very cycle you wish to escape, and you stop. Not because someone told you to, but because you've tasted the difference. You feel the truth in your own body. And here's something even more powerful. Once you understand that your present actions matter more than your past mistakes, you start to treat yourself differently. You stop trying to punish yourself into peace. You stop waiting for the past to fix itself, and you begin to live in the present as someone who deserves kindness. This shift is everything, because when anxiety hits, it often grabs onto some story from your past, a moment of failure, a wrong decision, a regret. And it says, look, this is who you are. This is why you don't deserve peace. But if you understand karma properly, you respond differently. You say, yes, that happened. And yes, it may have set some things in motion. But what I do now matters more than what I did then. And that response changes the cycle. That's how healing begins. It also helps you relate more gently to others, because once you understand that people's actions come from their conditions, their fears, their ignorance, you stop expecting them to be perfect. You stop holding grudges in the same way. You stop needing them to make up for it before you can let go. This doesn't mean you excuse harm. It means you stop adding extra pain on top of what already exists. You stop carrying what isn't yours. And in that release, anxiety loses one of its biggest fuel sources: resentment. Because when you hold on to the belief that someone should have acted differently, you're fighting with reality. You're wishing the past were different. And every time you replay that fight, you feel more powerless. But when you say, that happened, I can't change that, but I can choose how I carry it now, you shift from helplessness to agency. Understanding karma also protects you from magical thinking. That belief that if you just think good thoughts or do enough right things, nothing bad will ever happen to you. That belief creates more anxiety, not less, because when something painful does happen, you feel like you failed. But life isn't a vending machine. You don't press a good deeds button and get guaranteed peace. What the Dhamma teaches is more honest and more empowering. Life includes joy and sorrow, praise and blame, gain and loss. No one escapes that. But how you respond to it, how you meet each moment, that is where your power lives. That is where karma is alive, in your choices, not your fate. Even your relationship to anxiety is shaped by this. Do you meet it with fear or with interest? With avoidance or with care? Every moment of reaction is a new seed. Every moment of attention is a new condition. And when you stop trying to control every outcome, you create the space to respond wisely, without needing everything to be perfect first. This also changes how you look at healing. Many people carry the idea that healing means never feeling anxious again. That's not realistic, and it's not necessary. What matters is whether you relate to your anxiety with wisdom or with confusion. Do you use it as a trigger to wake up, or do you let it drag you into habits that only make it worse? With right understanding of karma, even anxiety becomes part of the path. Not something that blocks your progress, but something that reveals where your attention is still caught, where your heart still wants care. The anxiety becomes a signal, not a sentence, and that shift makes all the difference. It also helps with something very subtle, something most people don't even realize they're doing, trying to spiritually earn their way out of pain. People meditate harder, chant more, donate more, all in the hope that maybe, finally, life will be calm. But when you understand karma clearly, you see, this isn't a transaction. It's not about how much you give, it's about how deeply you see. Wisdom, not bargaining, brings peace. So, if you're tired of blaming yourself, tired of fearing the future, tired of carrying guilt like armor, let this teaching meet you where you are. You are not your past. You are not your thoughts. You are not being punished by life. You are part of a vast unfolding of cause and effect, moment by moment, breath by breath. And within that unfolding, there is space. Space to choose, space to respond, space to begin again. And tonight, as you rest, you don't need to figure everything out. You don't need to control what happens tomorrow. All you need to do is remember this. Your response right now is your karma. Let it be gentle. Let it be wise. Let it be kind. Because peace isn't something that comes later. It's something that begins when you stop running, stop judging, and start living this very moment with understanding. Even after we let go of guilt and understand that we're not being punished by life, a different kind of question starts to rise. Not, why is this happening to me? But, how is this happening at all? What is it that takes a neutral moment and turns it into fear? What starts that heavy feeling in the chest, that spiral in the mind, that sudden need to escape, even when nothing outside has actually changed? There's a deeper mechanism at work, subtle, fast, and almost invisible unless you know where to look. But when you begin to see it clearly, the grip of anxiety starts to loosen, not because the feeling disappears, but because the chain that gives birth to it gets interrupted. This is what the Buddha revealed in the teaching of dependent origination, or Paticca Samuppada, one of the most profound yet practical teachings in the entire Dhamma. This teaching isn't a theory or belief system. It's a way to see the exact steps by which suffering, including anxiety, comes into being. And even more importantly, it shows how to stop it from taking over. Anxiety doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's not dropped onto us from some mysterious place. It unfolds. It builds. It's conditioned. Like a fire, it needs fuel. And if we can understand what keeps feeding it, we can learn how to stop throwing in more wood, even when the fire is already burning. The Buddha laid out a clear sequence of conditions, 12 links, each one giving rise to the next. This isn't something abstract. It's a description of your experience, moment to moment. Let's start at the beginning. The first condition is ignorance, not knowing, not in the academic sense, but in the experiential sense, not seeing reality clearly. This means not understanding how the mind works, how thoughts form, how emotions arise, how everything is impermanent and not self. When this kind of ignorance is present, the rest of the chain unfolds automatically. From ignorance comes volitional formations, habits, tendencies, mental reactions. These are the patterns your mind has learned over years. For example, if you grew up in an unpredictable environment, your mind might have developed a habit of always scanning for danger. That scanning becomes automatic. It's a formation. It's not wrong. It's just conditioned by past experience. Then comes consciousness, the awareness that gets shaped by those patterns. You don't just see the world, you see it through the lens of those formations. That's why two people can be in the same situation, but only one feels anxious. It's not the situation. It's how consciousness is formed. Next, this consciousness meets name and form, the mental and physical experience, body and mind, thoughts and sensations. You begin to feel that rising tension in your stomach, that unease in your chest, those background thoughts starting to stir. Then comes the 6 sense bases: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind. Yes, the mind is considered a sense in Buddhism. It receives thoughts the way the eyes receive light. The moment you think something like, "I don't feel safe," that's the mental sense in action. Once a sense base is active, contact happens. Your mind touches an object, whether it's a sound, a thought, a memory. And the moment contact happens, feeling arises, not emotions. This means the feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That slight discomfort, that tightness, that's the early signal. It hasn't become anxiety yet, but it's moving in that direction. And now comes the turning point: craving. If the feeling is unpleasant, the mind wants it to go away. If it's pleasant, the mind wants it to stay. This is the root of the chain, the wanting. Wanting something to be different from how it is. In anxiety, this usually shows up as, "I need to fix this now," or "I can't feel this," or "something is wrong." That grasping response adds fuel. Next comes clinging, holding on tightly. Not just craving relief, but becoming mentally stuck. Obsessing, repeating the story, believing the thoughts. This is where anxiety stops being a wave and starts becoming a storm. The mind attaches. It no longer watches the feeling. It becomes the feeling. From clinging, becoming arises. You start becoming a version of yourself that is anxious. Not just, "I feel fear," but "I am afraid. I am not okay." The identity locks in. This is where the self begins to feel fragile, unsafe, threatened. And that leads to birth. Not literal birth, but the birth of the full anxious state. Now, it's no longer a small wave in the mind. It's a full emotional reaction. The heart is pounding. The thoughts are racing. The body is bracing. A whole inner world has been created, and it feels real. But even that isn't the end. From birth comes aging and death, which means decline, fear of loss, fear of things falling apart. You feel the dread that this moment will stay forever, or that it's a sign of something worse to come. That sense of doom, that's the final link in the chain of suffering. This is how anxiety builds, not in one jump, but in small, interlocking steps. And now comes the liberating truth. If you interrupt any part of the chain, the whole cycle begins to break down. You don't have to fight the entire thing. You just have to meet it with awareness at any one point, and that changes everything. For example, if you can recognize the feeling tone, just that the moment feels unpleasant, without immediately reacting to it, you stop craving from forming. And if craving doesn't arise, there's nothing to cling to. No identity is born, no spiral begins. Or maybe you catch the craving, but you don't follow it. You feel the urge to fix, to escape, to distract, but instead you pause, you breathe, you stay. That pause is wisdom. That pause is freedom. The power of this teaching is that it doesn't ask you to suppress anxiety. It invites you to understand it. And in understanding, there's space. Space to choose differently. Space to respond with wisdom instead of habit. This also reveals something very beautiful. Anxiety is not personal. It's not a character flaw. It's not a sign of failure. It's a process, a natural, conditioned unfolding. And processes can be unlearned, step by step. When you start to observe this chain in real time, you'll notice just how quickly it happens. A tiny discomfort can trigger a wave of mental construction. But the more you see it, the more you can step back and say, ah, there it is. Contact, feeling, craving, clinging. I see you. And that seeing itself is what begins to dissolve the power it has over you. Eventually, you start to intervene earlier in the chain. You notice the bodily sensations before they turn into thoughts. You notice the tone of a thought before you believe it. And you start to bring in new habits, curiosity instead of fear, patience instead of urgency, softness instead of control. And maybe most importantly, you begin to trust that your mind is trainable. You stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing your inner world as something you can work with, shape, and care for. You develop confidence in your own capacity to respond wisely, not because you always feel calm, but because you've seen clearly what anxiety is made of. This also helps with another common struggle, the fear that anxiety will never go away. When you don't understand the process, anxiety feels like a permanent identity. But when you see it as dependent origination, you realize this is just a chain, and every link in that chain is impermanent, changing, breakable. You stop asking, how do I get rid of anxiety forever? And start asking, where in this process can I bring clarity right now? That's a question rooted in power, not fantasy. And the more you practice, the more your system starts to reorganize. Not because you force it, but because old patterns that once went unnoticed now have a light shining on them. You might still feel the ripple of anxiety, but you no longer build a house in it. You let it pass. You let it go, not by ignoring it, but by not constructing it further. This is how the teachings protect us, not by making life perfect, but by helping us stop creating more pain on top of what already arises. And so, as you rest, even if thoughts continue, even if feelings stir, know this: you are not caught in a trap. You are simply watching a process. You don't have to fear it. You just have to know how it works. And with each moment of clear seeing, you take one link out of the chain, one moment of freedom, one breath of space, one step toward peace. Sometimes what wears you down isn't loud. It isn't the kind of fear that hits you all at once. It's the background noise, the heaviness that never really lifts, the unease you can't name, the tension you carry without knowing when it started. It's waking up already tired. It's feeling like you're always on, even when nothing is happening. This is the kind of suffering that doesn't scream, it hums beneath the surface. And it's the kind of anxiety that is hardest to see because it feels so normal. After learning how anxiety arises through causes and conditions, there's still one part of the puzzle left to uncover. What's silently feeding the system even when everything seems fine on the outside? That's where the understanding of Sankhara Dukkha comes in, what the Buddha called the suffering of conditioned formations. This is the most subtle form of dukkha, and it's often the most overlooked. To understand Sankhara Dukkha, we have to go back to the concept of sankharas, which are mental formations, patterns, reactions, habits, and constructions in the mind. They include thoughts, intentions, emotions, memories, beliefs. Some are obvious, like anger or fear. Others are invisible unless you know how to look. But whether loud or quiet, sankharas shape how we feel and how we perceive every moment of life. When we experience chronic anxiety that doesn't seem to have a cause, often what we're actually feeling is the effect of unexamined, layered mental formations. These formations are like background apps running in your mind, small on their own, but draining when they all pile up together. You don't notice them directly, you just feel their weight. Every time you assume something bad will happen, every time you brace for judgment, every time you subtly criticize yourself in the background of your thoughts, that's a sankhara in action. And because they've been repeated for so long, they begin to feel like part of your personality. But they're not you. They're just mental habits that formed under specific conditions and then kept running. This is where mindfulness begins to do its deeper work, not just noticing thoughts, but noticing how they're built. Not just seeing anxiety, but seeing the patterns that quietly give rise to it before the emotion even starts. Sankharas are the scaffolding of your experience, and most of the time, they're shaping how you feel without your permission. For example, take the way we often talk to ourselves internally, the tone we use, the expectations we carry, the rules we've absorbed about what we're allowed to feel, how we should behave, who we have to be in order to be okay. These aren't just ideas, they are sankharas, and they are shaping your body, your nervous system, and your emotional state every day. And here's the deeper truth. You don't have to be thinking anything clearly negative for these sankharas to create suffering. It's enough that the mind is constantly constructing experience through filters, through judgment, planning, control, comparison, resistance. Even neutral thoughts become heavy when they're pushed through layers of subtle tension. This is the engine behind that low-grade anxiety that never seems to go away. The mind, without noticing, keeps building reality out of assumptions, keeps narrating, keeps analyzing, keeps positioning the self as a thing that needs defending or improving. And all of this happens so fast, so quietly, that it becomes the baseline, until you begin to see it. And seeing it doesn't mean stopping it by force. You can't fight sankharas. You meet them with understanding. You learn to notice the effort behind the moment, the way your thoughts try to prepare you, the way your body stays slightly braced, the way your attention scans ahead, even when there's no threat. All of this is the product of mental formations trying to protect you, often in ways that are no longer needed. For many people, this protection formed early. A child learns to predict, to stay ahead, to make sense of things, to avoid pain. The mind learns to build structures around those lessons. But years later, even when those strategies no longer serve, the sankharas continue. And because they were meant to help, they don't feel like a problem. They feel like survival. This is why understanding sankhara dukkha is so important in working with anxiety. You stop looking only at the spikes of fear and start seeing the steady pressure of construction. You begin to feel where the mind is constantly shaping reality and how tiring that really is. And slowly, you begin to disidentify from those mental movements, not in a cold or detached way, but with compassion. You see that the inner critic is just a formation. The worry loop is just a formation. The need to always be planning is just a formation, and none of these formations are fixed. They're patterns, which means they can change. This is the path of gentle dismantling, not destroying the mind, but unlearning the parts of it that cause unnecessary pain. You begin to sense when something is being added to the moment, some layer of commentary, some subtle push or pull, and you learn to soften that, to rest before the construction starts, to come back to simplicity. That simplicity is not emptiness, it's clarity. It's the relief of being with experience as it is, before the mind starts shaping it into something else. And that's where peace lives, not in the absence of feeling, but in the absence of fabrication. Even physical tension can be tied to sankhara dukkha. Chronic tightness often reflects chronic internal shaping. The jaw clenches not just from stress, but from the effort to hold the self together in a certain way. The shoulders lift because the body is bracing against something the mind believes might happen. When you begin to relax the mental formations, the body starts to follow. But this is not an instant process. Sankharas don't disappear just because we see them. They're sticky because they've been practiced, they've been reinforced. So the practice is patience, staying with the unfolding, seeing again and again, this thought, this reaction, this identity I keep picking up. It's a pattern, not a truth. The Buddha used the image of a chariot to describe the self. The self is made up of parts: body, feeling, perception, formation, consciousness. But there is no unchanging thing in control, just a process, just movement. Sankhara dukkha comes from treating that process as a solid identity, constantly trying to build and hold it up. When you stop building, even for a moment, something different is felt. Not emptiness in the scary sense, but spaciousness. An ease that comes from not needing to be anyone special, not needing to fix every moment, not needing to prove your worth through your thoughts. This is the heart of healing anxiety at the level of formation. You stop feeding the need to shape experience. You allow what is already here, And in doing so, you step out of the momentum of constant becoming. That doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become free. Free to act without pressure. Free to rest without guilt. Free to feel without resistance. Because you're no longer measuring every moment against the mind's old blueprints. This practice leads to a kind of stillness, not frozen, but quiet. A stillness that doesn't come from control, but from releasing the need to control. The formations settle. The mind breathes. And in that breathing, you start to trust that you don't need to build peace. You need only stop constructing suffering. Even after you learn to see the patterns, even after you notice the thoughts, even after you loosen the grip of mental formations, something still holds on. Not the anxiety itself, but the one who is anxious. A quiet, persistent voice inside that says, "This is happening to me. I am the one who suffers. This is my fear, my failure, my story." It's not loud, but it's convincing. It creates a deep sense of personal weight. And it's that weight, more than any single thought or emotion, that keeps anxiety alive. This is where the Buddhist teaching of anatta, or non-self, becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes medicine. Because as long as we believe there is a solid, unchanging me who must hold everything together, we keep reinforcing the very stress we want to escape. We keep trying to protect an identity that doesn't actually exist the way we think it does. Non-self doesn't mean you don't exist. It doesn't deny your presence or your experience. What it questions is the idea of a fixed, permanent, independent self who is always in control. The Buddha taught that what we call self is really just a collection of processes: body, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. None of these are stable, none of them stay the same, and none of them are you in any solid way. But because we grow up being taught to see ourselves as singular and fixed, I am this kind of person, I'm not good at that, this is who I am, we cling to roles, labels, and stories. We build our identity out of them. And then, when life challenges those roles, when something threatens who we believe we are, we suffer. Not just from the situation, but from the belief that I am being attacked. I am failing. I am not enough. Anxiety rooted in identity is often the hardest to ease because it feels deeply personal. If you think you're someone who must always be competent, any mistake feels like danger. If you believe you're someone who must always be kind, any moment of anger feels like shame. If your sense of self depends on being strong, then any fear must be denied or hidden. And this is how anxiety becomes fused with identity. You're not just anxious, you're afraid of what your anxiety says about who you are. But when you start to see that this self is a moving target, something shaped by thoughts, moods, history, and momentary conditions, you begin to soften. You don't have to defend a permanent identity. You don't have to live up to a fixed version of yourself. You don't have to believe that your current state defines your worth. This creates space. And in that space, the pressure drops. Because now you can feel anxious without it becoming your identity. You can feel fear without it meaning you're weak. You can rest without proving you deserve it. There is nothing fixed to protect, only a flowing experience to meet with clarity. One of the most powerful effects of understanding non-self is the release of perfectionism. Perfectionism is built on the illusion of a fixed self that must always meet certain standards. But if there is no fixed self, then there is no perfect version of you to maintain. There is only this moment, unfolding through causes and conditions, shaped by awareness or by habit. You don't need to perform, you just need to see clearly. Even emotions like shame and guilt start to loosen when viewed through the lens of anatta. Shame depends on the belief that I am bad. Guilt whispers, I should have done better. But when you see that your actions, your thoughts, even your mistakes are not owned by a solid self, but are simply the results of countless conditions, you can take responsibility without punishment. You can learn without collapse. You can feel without drowning. This doesn't make you careless, it makes you compassionate, because now you treat yourself the way you would treat any other changing process, with attention, with care, and without the need to hold a grudge against yourself. Anatta also helps dismantle social anxiety. Much of our fear in social situations comes from trying to protect a certain image. We want to be seen as competent, likable, intelligent, calm. And we're terrified of being exposed as anything less. But when the self is seen as fluid and conditioned, these fears lose their teeth. What is there to defend? If the self is not fixed, then social approval becomes a passing wave, not a definition. You can show up without needing to prove who you are. You can speak without rehearsing every word. You can connect without shaping every moment. And that brings a quiet confidence, not the confidence of ego, but the confidence of no longer needing to be a solid somebody. Understanding anatta also helps with the fear of change. When we think there's a me that must stay in control, every shift in life feels threatening. Change means loss. Uncertainty means risk. But when the self is seen as part of the change itself, as something also moving, flexible, and empty of solidity, then change is no longer a threat to identity. It's just part of the process. You're not being undone, you're unfolding. Even the fear of death is softened by this understanding. What dies when there is no fixed self? The body returns to elements. The mind ceases activity, but the story of me ends only because it was never a fixed thing to begin with. This doesn't erase grief or sadness, but it releases the fear that your value depends on continuation. In daily life, practicing with anatta means watching how often you say I or mine in your mind. I can't handle this. My anxiety. This always happens to me. You start to catch the moment when ownership creeps in, and you question it, not to erase your experience, but to soften the grip. You shift from my suffering to suffering is present, from I am overwhelmed to overwhelm is arising. That shift may seem small, but it's a doorway to freedom, because the moment you stop personalizing pain, you stop multiplying it. You meet it as it is, without adding the burden of identity, and that changes the entire flavor of experience. Meditation on non-self can be deeply transformative when done gently. It's not about convincing yourself you don't exist. It's about turning your attention toward the processes that make up your experience and noticing how none of them can be held as me or mine in any stable way. Thoughts come and go. Emotions shift, sensations change, perceptions vary. Even the sense of being a witness is a condition, subtle but not permanent. This seeing doesn't make you disappear. It makes you free. Because now you're not trapped in the stories the mind tells about you. You're not trapped in your worst moment or your proudest one. You're not reduced to your history, your diagnosis, or your self-image. You're something simpler, more open, and far less burdened. When anxiety comes again, and it will, it doesn't have to mean you've failed. It doesn't have to mean anything about you at all. It's just a wave, a formation, a passing moment in a mind that is capable of clear seeing. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to fight it. You can simply remember, this, too, is not self. And when you live from that place, you begin to walk through the world more lightly. You're no longer building an identity with every choice. You're no longer collapsing every mistake into a crisis of self-worth. You're no longer living inside a cage built out of stories. You're just here, breathing, responding, being. Not as a fixed someone, but as awareness meeting the moment. And in that awareness, anxiety loses the solid ground it needs to grow. This is not a quick fix. It's a quiet unfolding. But each time you loosen the grip of identity, something shifts. A little more space, a little more calm, a little more freedom to just be without needing to be someone. Once you stop holding on to the fixed idea of who you think you are, a new kind of space opens up. But in that space, another question appears quietly. If there's no permanent self here, then what is here? What is this experience we keep calling me, and why does it feel so real, especially when fear takes over? To answer that, the Buddha didn't point to an abstract theory. He offered a clear, practical way of seeing through the illusion, not by rejecting life, but by understanding it through the lens of what are known as the 5 aggregates. This teaching is not about philosophy. It's a tool, a way to break apart suffering and see what it's really made of. Because anxiety is not one solid thing. It's a collection of shifting experiences that get stitched together by habit and mistaken identity. When you take the time to look into these parts, the body, the feeling tone, the perceptions, the mental habits, and the awareness itself, something surprising happens. The fear becomes less sticky. The pressure starts to loosen, and the experience you once thought was unbearable starts to change. The first aggregate is the body, form, matter, physical sensation. In the experience of anxiety, this is often where it's felt first. A racing heart, tight shoulders, tension in the stomach, shallow breath. These are not random symptoms. They're part of the structure of anxiety. And yet, so often, instead of simply noticing these sensations as changing physical conditions, we add meaning. We interpret them as proof that something is wrong. But the body doesn't have an agenda. It reacts to the nervous system, to thoughts, to old memories. When you see bodily sensations as just form, just the body doing what bodies do, you stop fueling panic with interpretation. This doesn't mean disconnecting from the body. It means relating to it differently, letting it speak in its own language without translating every feeling into a fear. A fast heartbeat is just that, a fast heartbeat. Tension in the chest is a signal to breathe, not a sign that you're in danger. The body changes constantly, and anxiety shows up and fades through those changes. Holding the body with awareness instead of fear is the beginning of calm. The second aggregate is feeling, not emotion, but the tone of experience. Every moment feels pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That's it. But from that simple feeling tone, entire stories grow. When the moment feels unpleasant, the mind rushes to label it. I can't handle this. This is bad. Make it stop. And now, the mind isn't just feeling, it's reacting. But if you pause and notice the raw tone of experience, without adding anything, you interrupt the chain. This is what allows you to be with discomfort without turning it into suffering. You notice the burning in your chest and say, unpleasant. That's enough. You don't need to chase it or fix it. You stay with the feeling tone and let it move. Because it will move. No feeling tone lasts. What keeps it stuck is the resistance. But when you stop resisting and simply observe the tone, pleasant or unpleasant, it loses its grip. This doesn't require effort, it requires presence. The third aggregate is perception, the way the mind recognizes patterns and labels experience. Perception is what tells you, that's a threat, or this is like before, or I know what this means. But perception isn't always accurate. It's filtered through memory, mood, and conditioning. It sees through a lens that's been shaped by your past. So, when anxiety arises, perception might instantly frame it as dangerous, even when it isn't. Seeing perception as part of the process helps you question your immediate conclusions. Just because something feels similar to a past experience doesn't mean it is the same. Just because the mind labels a situation as risky doesn't mean it actually is. You start to recognize that your perception is not reality. It's one interpretation, shaped by habit. And in that recognition, you start to loosen your loyalty to the anxious storyline. This is a powerful shift, because it means you don't have to believe everything your mind tells you. You can step back and say, this is just perception. Not to dismiss it, but to see it as a constructed layer, not a truth. You stop treating every judgment as fact, and slowly the mind becomes more flexible, more open, less reactive. The fourth aggregate is mental formations, intentions, habits, emotions, moods, reactions. These are not random. They are shaped by how you've lived, what you've experienced, and how you've responded in the past. In anxiety, this often shows up as overthinking, rehearsing worst-case scenarios, trying to control everything. These formations are active forces in the mind, and they're often trying to help, but they usually help in ways that create more stress. When you start to see these mental formations for what they are, patterns, not commands, you create distance. You notice a wave of panic rise and say, this is a formation. You notice the need to predict every outcome and label it, not with shame, but with clarity. This is just a pattern, a deeply practiced one maybe, but not personal, not permanent. And that allows you to stop reacting automatically. You recognize that just because a thought comes up doesn't mean it needs to be followed. Just because a plan forms doesn't mean it must be carried out. You start to choose your response, not be ruled by it. The mind becomes less chaotic because you stop fueling its momentum. The fifth aggregate is consciousness, the bare knowing, the awareness of what's happening. This might seem like the most neutral part, but it's also where subtle clinging can arise. We often hold on to awareness itself as a kind of hidden identity. I am the one who sees this. But even that sense of observer can be deconstructed. It's not you, it's just the knowing function. It's happening on its own, not controlled by a self. When you stop identifying with consciousness as something you own, you allow experience to flow more freely. You don't need to grasp at awareness or turn it into a position. You simply allow it to reflect what's arising, like a mirror. This is the deepest kind of letting go. You rest in knowing, without adding the burden of a knower. Working with the aggregates this way doesn't mean rejecting any part of yourself. It means understanding the parts so well that they no longer hold you captive. You see what's really happening in anxiety: a tightening around sensation, a reaction to unpleasantness, a misreading of perception, a clinging to mental habits, a mistaken view of awareness as self. When these pieces are seen clearly, the fear starts to dissolve. Not all at once, but steadily. You're not getting rid of anxiety. You're breaking the illusion that it defines you. You're seeing that what you called my fear is really just a combination of form, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness. A temporary assembly, nothing solid, nothing fixed, nothing that needs to be controlled. This is not denial, it's deeper honesty. You're not bypassing the experience, you're getting underneath it. And what you find there is not emptiness in the painful sense, but emptiness in the liberating sense. There's nothing to hold on to, and that's where the holding starts to stop. Through the lens of the aggregates, experience becomes less overwhelming. You can feel what's here without drowning in it. You can breathe through tension without becoming the tension. You can watch thoughts move without chasing or fearing them. Each part is just that, a part, no longer mistaken for the whole. This is how the mind begins to quiet, not through suppression, not through distraction, but through understanding, deep, direct, moment-by-moment seeing. And as you stay with this way of looking, the ground under your anxiety starts to shift. You're no longer trying to fix every thought. You're no longer trying to escape every emotion. You're no longer carrying the burden of being someone who must always feel okay. You're just watching the pieces rise and fall, with kindness, with steadiness, with no need to hold. And as that watching becomes more stable, a new clarity emerges, one that sees not only the aggregates, but also the way we relate to them. The beliefs we add, the ideals we hold, the rules we follow about who we should be. This is where the inner judge lives. And now we turn to that voice, the one that tries to keep us in line but ends up keeping us afraid. It's time to meet it with understanding, not to silence it, but to free ourselves from its grip. Once the aggregates are seen clearly, once you begin to understand the building blocks of experience and stop clinging to them, there's a natural lightness that arises. But for many, that lightness doesn't last, because even when you know the fear is not who you are, even when you know thoughts are just patterns, something else rises quietly to take their place. A whisper in the back of the mind, a voice that says, "You should have known better. You should be past this by now. You're not doing enough." This is the inner judge, and it is one of the most persistent causes of anxiety. It doesn't scream like fear. It doesn't flood like panic. It criticizes. It doubts. It holds up impossible standards and then punishes you for not meeting them. This voice often sounds like morality. It sounds like conscience. It sounds like self-improvement. But it's rooted in distortion. And unless it's understood, it will keep turning every spiritual insight into a new reason to feel inadequate. To work with this, you have to begin by seeing where the voice came from. No one is born with shame. Shame is taught, sometimes by family, sometimes by religion, sometimes by culture. It enters when you are young, when you don't yet know how to filter what's true, and so you absorb the idea that being loved means being good, and being good means following rules perfectly. And over time, being human starts to feel like a failure. Anxiety feeds on this kind of thinking. It attaches to your sense of right and wrong. It tells you that every mistake is proof of your unworthiness, that if you're not constantly doing the right thing, thinking the right way, being the right kind of person, you're failing. The pressure never ends, and eventually you stop trying to be free. You start trying to be perfect. This is where Buddhist ethics offers a different path. Morality in the Dhamma is not about obeying rules out of fear. It's about living in a way that supports inner peace. Right view on morality starts with compassion, not control. It's not about proving your worth. It's about creating conditions that lead to clarity and calm. That means your mistakes are not sins. They are causes with effects. If you speak harshly, it creates tension. If you act dishonestly, it creates confusion. But this is not punishment. It's simply the way things unfold. And because the effects are natural, they can be understood and changed. There's no eternal guilt to carry. Only learning to do better, not because you're broken, but because you want peace. When the inner judge doesn't understand this, it turns ethics into a weapon. It says, you meditated today, but not long enough. You were kind, but not perfectly patient. You slipped into worry again. How could you? And now, what was meant to be a path of freedom becomes a tool of pressure. The judge often confuses discipline with self-rejection. But the Buddha taught that discipline arises naturally when you see clearly. You don't have to force yourself to behave. You want to live in a way that brings peace, and if you forget, you begin again. That's enough. The inner judge resists this softness because it believes harshness is necessary for growth. But the Dhamma shows again and again, clarity, not cruelty, leads to change. Guilt and shame are two of the most common tools the inner judge uses. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Both are heavy. But guilt can sometimes be useful if it's brief and if it leads to wise action. Shame, on the other hand, serves no purpose. It shuts down the heart. It stops learning. It keeps you stuck in a loop of proving your worth, and that's where anxiety thrives. To free yourself from this loop, you must question the assumptions beneath it. Who taught you that you are only lovable when perfect? Who convinced you that making mistakes means you don't belong? Often, those beliefs come from others who were also carrying fear. Fear dressed as morality. Fear wrapped in expectations. But now, as an adult, you have a choice. You can stop passing that fear on to yourself. You can begin to practice a morality based on intention. This means looking not at whether your actions are always perfect, but whether they come from awareness, kindness, and a wish to grow. When your intention is rooted in care, you don't need to beat yourself up for every misstep. You simply adjust, gently, like steering a boat. not violently, just noticing and correcting course. This view also changes how you see spiritual progress. The inner judge wants every meditation session to be profound. It wants instant peace. But the path doesn't unfold in straight lines. Some days are clear, some are messy, some feel like going backward. But progress in the Dhamma is measured not by perfection, but by presence. Did you see the pattern sooner? Did you return more quickly? Did you speak with more kindness, even just once? These are signs of growth, and they matter. Letting go of the inner judge doesn't mean losing all structure. It means replacing pressure with integrity. You still keep precepts, you still reflect on your actions, but you do it with wisdom, not fear, with self-respect, not self-rejection. You recognize that living ethically is not a burden, it's a gift to your future self. This clarity is especially important when you're dealing with long-term anxiety, because chronic fear often comes with a long list of shoulds. I should be better by now. I shouldn't feel this way. I should know what to do. And each of those beliefs adds tension. You're not just anxious, you're anxious about being anxious. And the judge is right there, feeding the fire. When you meet the inner judge with mindfulness, you start to disarm it. You hear the voice, but you don't believe it. You say, "Thank you, but I don't need that right now." You see the harsh thought as a conditioned reaction, not a truth. And you begin to replace it with a wiser voice, a voice that knows the difference between being responsible and being ruthless. This voice says, "You're learning, you're growing, you're allowed to rest." It doesn't excuse harmful actions, but it understands that growth takes time, that learning involves mistakes, that peace can't be forced. This voice becomes your inner teacher, not soft because it's weak, but soft because it's clear. And as this new voice becomes stronger, you begin to relate differently to others too. The perfectionism that once made you judge yourself also made you critical of others. You expected them to meet impossible standards because you expected the same of yourself. But now, as you offer yourself more compassion, you begin to offer it to them too. This shifts your whole emotional landscape. You're no longer bracing for criticism. You're no longer trying to prove your worth. You're no longer trapped in a loop of moral panic. You're simply living, breathing, doing your best. And when you fall short, you get up. No drama, no judgment, just learning. Even the most difficult emotions begin to feel more workable. Because now you're not judging yourself for having them. You're meeting them as part of the human experience. You no longer think you're failing just because you feel overwhelmed. You no longer punish yourself for not having all the answers. You bring the same kindness to your inner world that you would offer to someone you truly love. And that's the key. Love is what the inner judge fears the most. Because love can't be earned through performance. Love comes when you stop performing, when you drop the mask, when you rest in who you are, flaws and all. The more you practice this, the less power the judge has. It may still whisper, but you'll know it's just noise, and you'll return again and again to the truth. You are already enough. You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to wake up. When the harsh voice inside you begins to quiet, what remains is not silence, it's sensation. The subtle currents underneath every experience. Before the thought forms, before emotion takes shape, before you judge anything as right or wrong, something else is already happening. a tone, a flavor, a felt response. This is where reactivity begins, not in words, but in Vedana, the raw, feeling tone of experience. This is the place most people never notice. Not because it's hidden, but because it's too close. It happens in every moment, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. These tones arise again and again, touching every thought, every sound, every memory, every breath. And if you don't see them clearly, they quietly decide how you live. You get pulled toward the pleasant, pushed away from the unpleasant, and overlook the neutral entirely. And this push and pull, this constant reaction, builds much of the anxiety you feel. To be free from this cycle, you don't need to get rid of feelings. You need to relate to them differently. You need to train your awareness to meet them without clinging or resisting. That's what mindfulness of Vedana teaches you. And once you understand how to watch this layer of experience without being pushed around by it, your relationship to fear, sadness, craving, and confusion begins to transform. Feeling tone is not emotion. It's much simpler than that. It's the initial impression. Does this moment feel good, bad, or neutral? That impression happens before you think about it, before you name it, before you react. But because it's so fast, the mind often doesn't even notice it. Instead, it jumps straight into wanting or avoiding. When a pleasant tone arises, the mind says, "I want more." When it's unpleasant, the mind says, "Make it stop." And when it's neutral, the mind gets bored, restless, distracted. These three reactions, grasping, aversion, and restlessness, are what keep the wheel of suffering turning. But when you learn to stay with the tone itself, just as it is, without needing it to change, the cycle starts to slow. Mindfulness of Vedana requires deep honesty, because sometimes what feels pleasant is not actually good for you, and sometimes what feels unpleasant is exactly what needs to be seen. If you aren't paying attention, you might chase what's easy and avoid what's true. You might eat to avoid sadness, scroll to escape restlessness, stay busy to avoid discomfort. But these habits keep anxiety alive. They cover the symptom, but never reach the cause. To truly practice with Vedana, you have to become curious. When discomfort arises, can you feel it without flinching? When pleasure arises, can you notice the pull without grabbing it? When nothing much is happening, can you stay present without looking for something to fix? This is the heart of emotional balance, not through control, but through observation. You're not shutting down feeling. You're watching the waves rise and fall without jumping on each one. And over time, you start to see how much energy you've spent trying to manage experience instead of meeting it. The more clearly you see Vedana, the less trapped you feel. You realize that pain is not the enemy. It's the reactivity that hurts. The ache in your chest is unpleasant, but the thought, "This means something is wrong," is what creates panic. The boredom you feel while sitting still is neutral, but the thought, "This is pointless," is what creates restlessness. By staying with the tone without adding the story, you short-circuit the suffering. One of the most valuable things this practice teaches is that unpleasant does not mean unsafe. So often, we treat discomfort like danger. But most of what arises in daily life is simply a passing sensation that feels tight or hot or heavy. It's not a threat, it's a message. And when you stop trying to shut it down, you can hear what it's saying. The same is true for pleasant tones. They're not wrong. Joy, connection, warmth, these are beautiful. But when you cling to them, when you try to stretch them out or make them last, that grasping creates a new tension. You go from feeling happiness to fearing its loss. You go from contentment to craving. The problem isn't the pleasure, it's the attachment. Mindfulness of Vedana allows you to enjoy pleasure without holding on, to feel pain without pushing it away, to meet the neutral with appreciation instead of indifference. This doesn't make you numb, it makes you awake, because now you're no longer reacting to every stimulus, you're responding with wisdom. This practice also helps you see the deeper habits that drive anxiety. For example, you may notice that the moment you feel an unpleasant tone, your shoulders tighten, your breath shortens. The mind begins to prepare for a problem. But if you catch that first tone, you can interrupt the chain. You can say to yourself, this is just unpleasant. Not a crisis, not a failure, just sensation. And when you see that clearly, you don't need to defend or escape. This is especially powerful in relationships. You hear a certain tone in someone's voice, unpleasant. Instantly the mind moves. They're upset. I did something wrong. I need to explain. But if you can pause and feel the tone before the story starts, you have a choice. You can listen without reacting. You can respond instead of defend. You can stay connected, even when emotions rise. In this way, Vedana practice creates space between stimulus and reaction. That space is where freedom lives. You don't become passive, you become precise. You act from clarity, not compulsion. You speak from presence, not panic. And that presence is what transforms anxiety, not by removing intensity, but by shifting how you meet it. This practice is also deeply helpful for trauma healing, because trauma often leaves a nervous system that reacts quickly to any unpleasant tone. A sound, a look, a memory can feel unbearable even when there's no danger. But when you learn to feel the tone as tone, before it becomes a story, you begin to rebuild trust with your body. You start to realize that you can stay present, even when the sensations are sharp. That trust is everything. Because for many people, anxiety is not just fear of a situation, it's fear of their own response. Fear of being overwhelmed, fear of what might happen if they really feel. But through Vedana, you practice staying, one breath at a time, one feeling at a time, and your system learns, I can be with this. I don't have to run, I don't have to freeze, I can stay. Even boredom becomes a teacher here, because boredom is often the signal that nothing is happening that feels pleasant or unpleasant, just neutral. And the mind hates neutral. It wants stimulation, it wants distraction. But if you can rest with neutrality, something softens. You stop needing every moment to entertain you. You stop needing constant input. And in that stillness, peace becomes possible. The more you practice, the more subtle your awareness becomes. You start to feel tone arise with thoughts, memories, even silence. You notice how one word can feel pleasant, another unpleasant. You notice how the body leans forward in craving or pulls back in aversion. And through it all, you don't try to stop the tones. You just stop being ruled by them. This is emotional maturity. Not that you no longer feel, but that your feeling no longer controls you. You are in touch with every layer of experience, but not entangled in it. And this is what makes deep peace possible. Not avoidance, but intimacy without fear. You begin to see that your true stability doesn't come from having only pleasant experiences. It comes from meeting all experiences with presence, from being so grounded in awareness that no tone can shake you loose. Not because you're numb, but because you're free. And with that freedom comes compassion. Because when you know how hard it is to be with unpleasant tones, you understand what others are going through. You become more patient, less reactive, more willing to hold space, not just for yourself, but for those around you. This is not a small shift. It changes how you live. You no longer chase every pleasant moment. You no longer run from discomfort. You no longer sleepwalk through neutral days. You begin to live fully, openly, with nothing to avoid and nothing to control. The more clearly you learn to observe the feeling tones of your experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, the more obvious it becomes that suffering doesn't come from the sensations themselves. It comes from the tension we carry around them. That tension doesn't always come from belief or memory. Often it's stored in the body itself, not as trauma alone, but as rigidity, holding, bracing. The body forgets how to be soft, how to be fluid, how to move with the present moment instead of resisting it. And without realizing it, we begin to live as if we are locked in place, not physically, but psychologically. This is where dhatu contemplation, or meditation on the elements, begins its quiet and powerful work. There's something grounding about returning to what is most basic. Before there were names for emotions or thoughts or identities, there was simply form, the body, the breath, the felt sense of being alive. When you contemplate the elements, you are not escaping into abstract philosophy. You are returning to the most direct physical experience of life. Earth, water, fire, air, space. These are not symbolic. They are qualities you can feel. And when you train the mind to recognize them clearly, what seemed solid and overwhelming begins to feel workable. Anxiety loses its edge, not because it disappears, but because it is seen as movement, not as a personal failure. Start with the earth element. This is the sensation of structure, density, heaviness. When you feel weighed down by emotion, when your chest feels like it's caving in, or your limbs feel heavy, this is not just a metaphor. It's earth element expressing itself through the body. You can place your awareness on the contact between your body and the ground, the pressure of your feet, the stability of your spine. Let your mind rest there without trying to change anything. You begin to sense a kind of quiet strength. Earth doesn't rush, it doesn't explain itself, it just supports. Let the mind borrow some of that stability. When fear begins to rise, return to what holds you, not your ideas, but the ground beneath you. Let that be enough. Then bring attention to the water element. This is the quality of cohesion, softness, fluidity. It expresses itself in the way your body holds moisture, in the flow of blood, in the tears you resist or release. Emotion often moves like water. It swells, spills, recedes. When anxiety rises as tightness in the chest or pressure behind the eyes, recognize water at work. You're not malfunctioning. You're feeling. And that's not a mistake. Let the sensation of fluidity guide you. You might visualize water moving through the body, not to control it, but to remind yourself that nothing stays frozen. Even grief, even fear flows if you stop gripping it. The fire element shows up in heat, energy, transformation. It can be warmth from within or sharp flashes of heat that often accompany panic or anger. Many people experience anxiety as burning, heat in the face, neck, or stomach. Fire is not aggression, though it can express itself that way when unbalanced. In its balanced form, fire is presence, alertness, passion. It helps digest food, ideas, emotions. When you recognize fire in your experience, don't try to put it out. Let it be felt. Let it rise and fall like a flame. Fire transforms without needing to be fixed. When you stop fearing heat, you stop fearing intensity. Air is the quality of motion, lightness, movement. It's found in the breath, but also in the buzzing feeling in the limbs or the shakiness in the hands. It's the flutter in the chest that doesn't stop. It's the fidgeting you can't explain. When anxiety takes the form of restlessness, air is active. But instead of seeing this as a problem, you can see it as the body's way of staying alert. Bring attention to the breath, not to control it, but to feel its rhythm. Long or short, smooth or jagged, the breath is always a mirror. When you observe it with care, it often begins to regulate itself. But even if it doesn't, your willingness to stay with it without panic teaches the body that movement is not danger. Then there is space. Space is not an object. It's the absence of obstruction. It's what allows all the other elements to be known. When you feel trapped in thought, closed in by fear, suffocated by experience, what's actually happening is a loss of space, not in your environment, but in your awareness. You forget there's room around the fear. You forget that between each breath, each sensation, there is openness. The practice of space is not visualizing an empty sky. It's recognizing the silence between words, the stillness between thoughts, the subtle wideness that holds everything you feel. When you rest in space, you stop needing to fix experience. You realize you don't have to push anything away. There's room for it all. Each element can be observed in stillness or in movement. You can sit quietly and scan the body, noting which element feels dominant. Or you can walk, clean, work, and notice. Where is earth now? What is water doing? Is fire present? How is air moving? Is there space to hold it? This reflection is not analytical. It's somatic. You are feeling, not thinking. And the more you practice, the more your experience of self begins to shift. What you used to call, "I am overwhelmed," becomes "there is much air and fire." What once felt like, "I'm too sensitive," becomes "water is active right now." You stop assigning moral meaning to physical reactions. You stop turning sensations into identities. This is what dissolves rigidity, not force, but recognition. You see that the body is not a solid object. It's a dynamic field of energies, constantly shifting, and so is the mind. This practice also creates a powerful doorway out of reactivity. When fear arises, instead of reacting to the story, you ask, what elements are present? You stay with the qualities. You notice the pressure, the warmth, the trembling, and slowly you train your system to trust that sensation is safe, that nothing needs to be denied or controlled. This deconstructs the sense of threat, not because you've removed the feeling, but because you've removed the fight against it. The elements also help you find balance. If air is too strong, too much motion, you bring in earth, grounding through contact with the body. If fire is too hot, anger or panic, you soften with water, cool the system with gentle movement or stillness. If everything feels stuck, heavy, collapsed, too much earth, you awaken with breath, light, gentle motion. And always, around all of it, you expand awareness into space. You don't resist the dominant element, you balance it. Over time, this practice creates a new relationship with the body. You stop fearing the physical signs of anxiety. You stop labeling every symptom as a crisis. You learn to listen, to observe, to be present with what is. And this brings a deep kind of confidence. Not the confidence of always feeling good, but the confidence of knowing you can stay, no matter what arises. That kind of stability is not built in thought. It's built in sensation. In meeting experience at the elemental level, in remembering that your fear, your joy, your confusion, your peace, they all arise from the same source. They are just different arrangements of the same basic ingredients. The more you see this, the less tightly you hold on. You stop needing to fix the elements. You start flowing with them. Even difficult emotions begin to feel less personal. Grief becomes heavy water. Anger becomes sharp fire. Restlessness becomes turbulent air. And all of them are just passing conditions, waiting to be met with wisdom. Dhatu contemplation is not about detaching from life. It's about stepping so fully into life that nothing needs to be avoided. You no longer live inside a rigid identity that must be defended. You live in a body made of earth and water, breath and warmth, held by space. That's more than enough. As you learn to rest in the body, not as an object to be fixed, but as a field of elements constantly changing, something becomes unmistakably clear. Most of the pain you carry doesn't come from what's happening inside your body or even in your mind. It comes from what you are chasing or resisting in the world around you. The effort to stay in control, the pressure to secure outcomes, the constant measuring of whether you are winning or losing, accepted or rejected, rising or falling. This struggle, repeated day after day, keeps anxiety alive, even when nothing is wrong in the present moment. And it is precisely this invisible pressure that the Buddha called the pull of the 8 worldly winds. Gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, pleasure and pain. These are the winds that move the world. They blow through every life without exception. It doesn't matter how wise or accomplished someone is, these winds still come. The difference lies in how you respond. Most people chase the ones they like and flee from the ones they fear. And this movement, this clinging and aversion, is what creates stress, tension, and reactivity. Anxiety forms when your peace depends on staying on the right side of these winds. You feel safe when things are going well, when you're gaining, when you're liked, when things feel good. But you also become afraid that it could all fall apart, that you'll lose what you have, that others will change their opinions, that discomfort will return. It's not the experience itself that's unbearable, it's the fear of losing what feels safe. That fear is subtle, but it never lets you rest. Start with gain and loss. The need to achieve, accumulate, progress. It drives many lives. But if your sense of stability depends on always getting more money, more success, more security, then every setback becomes a threat. The fear of failure takes root. Not because failing hurts, but because failing seems to mean something about you. It feels like you've lost your place in the world. But gain and loss are inevitable. They're part of movement. What comes will also go. The more you cling to what you have, the more tightly fear wraps around your chest. Letting go doesn't mean not caring. It means caring without attachment. It means doing your best and releasing what you can't control. Praise and blame work the same way. When people like you, praise you, approve of your actions, it feels like stability, like worth. But the moment someone disapproves or criticizes you, anxiety rises. Not because the words are sharp, but because your identity has been built on being seen a certain way. When your peace depends on others liking you, you become a prisoner to perception. You stop speaking honestly. You overthink every word. You perform instead of connect. But even praise is unstable. People's opinions change with their moods. Their judgments often reflect more about themselves than about you. Letting go of the need for approval is not easy. But the alternative is to live in constant fear of rejection. That fear dissolves when you realize your value is not built on compliments. It's built on integrity. Fame and disrepute are not just about public recognition. They're about how widely you are seen and how you are remembered. On a smaller scale, this plays out in your social group, in your family, in the stories people tell about you. If your sense of identity is tied to being known, respected, admired, then even small shifts in how others see you feel dangerous. You might start managing your image more than your life. You might become afraid to change, afraid to grow, because doing so might risk your standing. But fame is just projection. Disrepute is also projection. What matters is whether your actions are grounded in truth. Trying to control how people remember you only pulls you away from presence. Pleasure and pain are the most immediate of the 8 winds. Every moment is touched by sensation. And for most, the pattern is simple. Seek pleasure, avoid pain. But when you live this way, you are always leaning forward or pulling back. You're never settled. Even when things feel good, you start fearing the end. Even when you feel calm, you anticipate the return of discomfort. This creates anxiety in the middle of joy, because you've tied your peace to feeling a certain way. But when you practice being with pain without resistance and pleasure without clinging, you stop depending on the moment being any particular way. That's freedom. All 8 winds operate together, often without being noticed. You feel pressure to succeed because of the promise of gain and the fear of loss. You seek praise and fame because they feel like confirmation that you matter. You avoid blame and disrepute because they threaten your belonging. You crave pleasure because it feels safe. You fear pain because it feels like punishment. But none of this is fixed. These winds don't define you. They only move through you. The Buddha didn't teach people how to avoid the winds. He taught them how to stand still in the middle of them, to be unmoved, not because they stopped caring, but because they saw clearly. They saw that these experiences rise and fall again and again, that clinging to them brings suffering and letting them pass brings peace. So how do you practice with these winds? Start by naming them when they arise. When you feel the rush of success, say gain. When you feel shame, say blame. This helps you separate the experience from your identity. You're not caught in the content, you're observing the pattern. Then, notice the reaction. What does the mind do when praised? Does it cling? Does it rehearse? Does it want more? What does the body do when pain arises? Does it tense? Does it resist? Does it collapse? Just seeing these reactions weakens their hold. The key is equanimity, not detachment, but balance, meeting each wind with evenness. Gain and loss are met with the same calm. Praise and blame don't shake your core. Fame and disrepute don't define your path. Pleasure and pain don't trap you in reactivity. This doesn't mean you don't feel, it means you don't cling. You stay rooted in something deeper than experience, wisdom. Over time, you start to live differently. You make decisions based on values, not applause. You work hard, but not for validation. You enjoy good moments without needing to make them last. You face hard moments without believing they'll break you. You stop managing your life like a brand. You start living your life like a path. This doesn't mean passivity. It means clarity. You still act. You still speak. You still care. But you do so from steadiness, not from fear. And when setbacks happen, as they always will, you don't collapse. You adapt. You learn. You keep going. The practice deepens when you start to see how these winds shape your inner world. You notice how your thoughts shift when someone praises you, how your posture changes when you feel rejected, how your breath shortens when you anticipate loss. And in each moment, you bring awareness. You breathe. You stay. You remember, this is a wind. It will pass. I don't need to react. This isn't about becoming indifferent. It's about becoming free. Free to enjoy without attachment. Free to serve without self-interest. Free to feel deeply without losing your balance. The less you cling to these winds, the more your heart opens. Because you're no longer trying to protect a fragile identity. You're living from something spacious, grounded, and true. And when anxiety tries to return, when the fear of losing control creeps back in, you meet it with the same steadiness. You don't need to control the wind. You only need to stop chasing it. Your peace is not found in the next gain, the next compliment, the next moment of pleasure. Your peace is here, in this breath, in this awareness, in your willingness to let go. The moment you stop chasing the shifting winds of gain and loss, praise and blame, something deeper starts to settle. But in that settling, a new kind of silence appears, a space that once was filled with noise, striving and comparison. And that space can feel unfamiliar, because for so long your energy has been tied to reaching, proving, accumulating, and holding on. When those efforts stop, even for a moment, the question arises, what now? This is where the teaching on renunciation becomes not an escape from life, but a return to it, not as a rejection of joy, but as the recognition of a joy that doesn't rely on outcomes. The word renunciation often sounds harsh. To many, it seems like giving up too much. But from a Buddhist perspective, renunciation is not about becoming less alive. It's about being free from what keeps you divided inside. It's the letting go that leads to strength. It's choosing peace over possession, presence over distraction, depth over surface. Anxiety feeds on attachment, not just to things, but to roles, expectations, imagined futures, unexamined habits. The fear of losing what you think you need is often stronger than any actual loss. You fear being without, not because you are truly unsafe, but because the identity built on having, doing, or becoming feels threatened. This fear tightens the body, it speeds the breath, it creates tension even when nothing is happening. The practice of renunciation addresses this at its root, not by forcing you to give things up, but by showing you what was never necessary in the first place. Letting go voluntarily is different from losing something by force. When something is taken from you, it creates grief, resistance, or numbness. But when you place something down with awareness, when you see that clinging no longer serves, that choice becomes a source of confidence. You realize you do not need to possess everything you once held tightly. You do not need to chase every comfort to feel whole. Letting go becomes a statement of sufficiency. I am enough without this. This is not about poverty. It's not about pushing life away. It's about clearing space. When you no longer need constant stimulation, you begin to hear your own mind. When you stop needing every moment to be pleasant, you begin to feel grounded. When you step away from roles that exhaust you, you begin to remember who you are without effort. Renunciation is not a sacrifice, it's a return. Even small acts of letting go can be powerful. Turning off a device and sitting in silence, saying no to something that feeds the ego but drains the heart, releasing the pressure to impress, to win, to always be seen. Each of these is a form of renunciation. You don't need to live in a forest. You just need to recognize what you're carrying that doesn't bring peace and set it down. Attachment is not only to material things, often it's more subtle. A belief that you must always be productive, a narrative about being strong or independent, an image of success you inherited without question. These attachments shape your anxiety. They create a constant background fear of not measuring up. When you begin to question them, when you begin to ask, "What am I really afraid of letting go?" you open the door to freedom. Renunciation is most powerful when it comes from clarity, not from shame, not from pressure, but from seeing that peace isn't found in more, it's found in less grasping. The Buddha didn't teach letting go as a punishment. He taught it as the path to contentment, because the mind that is not burdened by craving can finally rest. And that rest is what the anxious heart has been longing for. There's a deep shift that happens when you let go of something you thought you couldn't live without and discover that you're still here, still breathing, still grounded, still whole. That shift doesn't happen through analysis. It happens through practice, through living simply with intention, through questioning what you really need to feel safe. Security is often confused with control, but real security comes from stability in your relationship to change. When you understand that all things come and go, and that your peace depends not on their presence, but on your awareness, you stop grasping. You stop fearing the future. You learn to meet life as it is, without needing it to match your plans. This is why renunciation is empowering. because it returns your attention to where your real agency lives, in your response, in your clarity, in your presence. You may not be able to keep everything you love, but you can train your heart to stay open when things change. You may not be able to avoid discomfort, but you can stop adding layers of fear to every shift. One way to approach this is by reflecting on what you consume. Not just food or possessions, but information, entertainment, opinions, even emotional energy. Every time you consume something, ask, is this nourishing or numbing? Is this clarifying or distracting? When you choose nourishment, you are renouncing what dulls the mind. You are choosing to protect your attention, your peace, your clarity. Another form of renunciation is in your speech, letting go of the need to comment on everything, to defend every opinion, to insert yourself in every conversation. This doesn't mean becoming silent. It means becoming intentional. You start to notice how much of your talking is driven by fear of being forgotten or the need to be right. When you let go of that need, your words become fewer, but also more meaningful. You can also practice renunciation in relationships, not by walking away, but by letting go of control, letting others be as they are, letting go of the fantasy that you can manage their emotions, fix their problems, or keep them close forever. You begin to love with openness instead of grasping, with presence instead of demand. This shift changes everything. Relationships become less about securing yourself and more about sharing what's real. Renunciation brings up fear because it's misunderstood. You fear you'll miss out, that you'll become less. But what actually happens is the opposite. You gain spaciousness. You become more available, more grounded, more aligned. You move through life not with attachment, but with freedom to engage without losing yourself. That is what the practice points to. Not emptiness in a negative sense, but the kind of emptiness that feels like room to breathe. The Buddhist path doesn't deny the beauty of the world. It points to the suffering that comes from trying to own it. You can enjoy, participate, connect, but with hands open. When you stop gripping so tightly, your nervous system can relax, your body softens, your breath deepens, and the mind, no longer obsessed with holding on, begins to rest. This rest isn't laziness, it's clarity. You act from wisdom, not reaction. You serve from fullness, not depletion. You speak from understanding, not fear. And you know when to stop, when to pause, when to let go, not because you're giving up, but because you've learned to trust that letting go is the way forward. Even your spiritual path can benefit from this kind of letting go of the idea of progress, of becoming someone better, of reaching some final state, because anxiety can sneak into practice too. You start comparing your peace to someone else's. You chase a version of awakening that looks like someone else's story. But when you renounce comparison, your own path opens, quietly, authentically. Letting go is never about rejecting life. It's about learning how to stop clinging to what cannot be kept. It's about discovering that the more you hold on, the more you suffer, and the more you release, the more clearly you see. The clarity that follows renunciation isn't cold, it's luminous. It lets you meet the world with steady eyes and a peaceful heart. After letting go of possessions, roles, and the need to control how others see you, something lighter begins to settle inside. You feel more space, less urgency. But then, a quieter layer of discomfort often starts to surface. One that's easy to miss because it hides behind good intentions. It doesn't feel like craving in the usual sense. It feels like effort. It feels like wanting to improve, to heal, to evolve. It feels like a wish to feel better. Yet, somehow, this wish can make you restless again. This is the subtle tension of spiritual boredom, a discomfort that arises not from external problems, but from the internal expectation that your practice should constantly produce peace, insight, or transcendence. When it doesn't, the mind grows uneasy. You begin to wonder whether you're doing something wrong, or worse, whether something's wrong with you. This unease often starts with good motivation. You begin a meditation practice to understand your mind or to relieve suffering. At first, it brings a sense of clarity. You feel lighter, but over time, those strong results begin to fade. The novelty wears off. The silence no longer feels profound, it feels dull. The breath feels repetitive. Sitting still feels like effort. And then comes the thought, "This shouldn't feel this way." That thought is the seed of a new anxiety. This kind of discomfort is tricky because it disguises itself as something noble. You want to feel better, to be more awake, to live in truth. But if you look closely, you'll see that the drive underneath is still grasping, wanting the present moment to be more than it is, wanting your spiritual path to be exciting, wanting stillness to feel like fireworks. And when it doesn't, you start reaching again. Not for the material world, but for peak experiences, blissful states, or deep insights. That reaching creates tension, even if it looks spiritual from the outside. Spiritual bypassing begins here. It happens when you use your practice to avoid discomfort rather than to meet it. You tell yourself you're being mindful, but really you're trying to escape a part of your experience. You say you're letting go, but really you're resisting the dullness of the present. You want a calm mind, but only if it feels interesting. You want truth, but only if it comforts. And when it doesn't, you start looking elsewhere. New teachings, new methods, new teachers, believing that the answer must be something more than this. But boredom is not the enemy, nor is it a mistake. It's a doorway, a sign that the mind has exhausted its usual sources of stimulation and is now face to face with simplicity. And simplicity, when you stay with it, reveals depth. Not quickly, not dramatically, but quietly, patiently, like water slowly carving through stone. The problem isn't the absence of excitement. The problem is the belief that excitement is required. When you expect your spiritual practice to always feel meaningful, peaceful, or profound, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. You're holding a subtle standard, and that standard becomes a form of inner pressure. You meditate, but with an agenda. You breathe, but only to get somewhere. You let go, but only as a strategy to feel better. The Buddha didn't teach meditation as a way to feel good. He taught it as a way to see clearly. And sometimes what you see is emptiness, not the beautiful kind that feels vast and open, the dull kind, the kind that feels like nothing is happening. But even that is something to observe. Even that has tone, texture, temperature. Even that teaches patience. If you can learn to stay with boredom, to observe the mind's resistance without reacting, you begin to notice what's underneath. Often, boredom covers fear. The fear that life without drama is meaningless, that without intensity there is nothing to hold on to, that if you stop reaching, you'll disappear. These fears aren't conscious. They live in the body, in the nervous system. But when you stay still long enough, they start to speak. And when they do, you don't need to argue. You don't need to explain. You just stay. You breathe. You watch. And slowly, the fear softens. You realize that peace doesn't have to feel exciting. That meaning doesn't have to arrive in flashes of insight. That growth often looks like nothing changing until one day you realize you're not reacting to life the way you used to. There's a deep liberation in realizing that you don't have to feel better to be okay. That you can sit in stillness, feel absolutely nothing special, and still be present, still be awake. This is the turning point. When practice becomes less about how it feels and more about how steadily you stay. The desire to always feel good is just another form of craving. It's subtle, but it's sticky. It tells you that your worth is tied to your state of mind, that your progress is measured by your mood. But mood is not truth. Peace is not a sensation. It's the absence of struggle. And that absence might feel like stillness, or quiet, or even boredom, but it's alive in its own way. Simple, unadorned, clear. You begin to train your mind to recognize value in subtlety. The quiet shift in posture when anxiety passes, the softening of the jaw after a deep exhale, the moment when a reactive thought arises and you notice it without following. These are not fireworks, but they are freedom, and they're easy to miss if you're always looking for something better. This also changes how you relate to other people's journeys. You stop comparing. You stop assuming that someone else's insight means you're behind. You realize that spiritual highs are not the goal. They're moments. Beautiful, but not sustainable. They come and go. What stays is your willingness to keep showing up, to keep practicing even when it's dry, even when it's slow, even when nothing seems to happen. And in that consistency, something deeper grows. Not performance, not enlightenment as a trophy, but stability, a groundedness that doesn't depend on feeling inspired, a presence that doesn't rely on being moved. You become trustworthy to yourself, not because you always feel good, but because you've stopped needing to. This is the heart of mature practice, not spiritual excitement, but spiritual endurance, the kind that shows up day after day, breath after breath, not out of obligation, but out of love. Love for truth, even when it's quiet. Love for life, even when it's still. Love for your own humanity, even when it's not transforming in visible ways. The agitation that comes from trying to feel better fades over time when you stop giving it energy. When you stop needing your experience to entertain you, you start meeting it as it is. And in that meeting, life begins to open, slowly, steadily, on its own terms. You don't need to add meaning to every moment. You don't need to make every practice session feel important. You just need to stay, to listen, to trust that the most meaningful things grow in silence. Once you stop reaching for better feelings and begin meeting each moment as it is, without needing it to transform, you discover something surprising. Fear doesn't go away, but it also doesn't hold the same weight. It stops being a wall and becomes a door. Not a door you have to break through, but one you can walk up to, stand in front of, and stay with. That staying is not force. It's not resistance. It's a different kind of strength, one that doesn't come from pushing harder, but from opening wider. This strength is not built on toughness. It's rooted in the heart. And the Buddha taught that the most powerful kind of courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of love, compassion, joy for others, and calm balance. These four inner qualities, metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha, are known as the Brahma Viharas, or the divine abodes. They are not escapes from life's intensity. They are the foundation from which you can face it with steadiness. These qualities are not emotional decorations. They are practices, disciplines, and more than that, they are antidotes. Each one transforms how fear operates in the mind. They take what feels overwhelming and make it workable, not because the fear goes away, but because you're no longer facing it alone. You're meeting it with the whole heart. Metta, or loving kindness, is not about pretending everything is okay. It's about inclining the heart toward care, even in the face of fear. When anxiety arises, the instinct is often to fight it or to collapse into it. But when you meet anxiety with kindness, you stop treating it as the enemy. You begin to understand that fear is not bad. It's part of your sensitivity, your wiring, your history. It's a messenger, not a flaw. Kindness turns the emotional environment into one that can hold discomfort without judgment. When you say, "May I be safe, may I be well," you are not casting a spell. You are creating space. You are reminding yourself that even here, in this unsettled moment, you deserve gentleness. That reminder changes how you breathe, how you sit, how you treat yourself. And when fear feels seen, not attacked, it starts to soften. Karuna, or compassion, is what arises when you see suffering clearly and respond with care. But real compassion begins with yourself, especially when fear shows up. Often, people judge their own anxiety. They feel ashamed. They think it means they're weak, broken, or not far enough along the path. But compassion says, this too is worthy of care. It doesn't wait for the pain to improve before offering warmth. Practicing compassion means being honest about where it hurts, without collapse, without dramatizing, without turning pain into identity. Just the clear recognition that something here is tender, and that tenderness deserves to be met with presence. When you do this regularly, something changes in your system. Fear still arises, but it's not layered with shame. It's not weaponized by self-judgment. You create the conditions for healing simply by not turning away. Mudita, or empathetic joy, seems at first to have little to do with fear, but it's one of the most powerful supports in difficult times. Fear narrows the mind. It pulls attention inward. It creates the illusion that you're alone. Joy for others opens the field again. When you learn to celebrate someone else's peace, someone else's happiness, someone else's success, you remind yourself that goodness is still possible, right now, even in the middle of your struggle. This practice is not about comparison. It's not about denying your pain. It's about expanding your awareness beyond the tight grip of self-focus. Fear often thrives in isolation. Joy for others breaks that isolation without needing to fix anything. You're not using someone else's joy to escape your discomfort. You're using it to reconnect with life. This kind of joy is not loud or fake. It's quiet, real, and deeply healing. Then there's upekkha, equanimity. This is the steady heart, the capacity to stay centered while everything moves around you. Equanimity doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being controlled by every wave. You see pain, you see joy, you see change, and you meet them all with the same inner balance. You don't shut down, you don't get pulled into extremes. You stay present. That presence is not passive, it's deeply alive. Practicing equanimity helps when fear tells you that you can't handle what's coming, because fear loves to live in the future. It asks, what if? What if it gets worse? What if I can't cope? But equanimity brings you back. Right now, this breath, this sensation, this thought, just this. And even if it's hard, you begin to learn that difficulty doesn't mean disaster, that you don't need to feel perfect to be okay. These 4 qualities are called divine abodes because they are places the heart can live. Not occasionally visit, but dwell in. They're not goals to reach, they're foundations to return to. And when they are developed, they create the conditions for true courage. Not the courage to fight through life, but the courage to stay open to it, to feel everything without being ruled by anything. In fear, the instinct is often to shrink, to close down, to make the world smaller. But with the Brahma Viharas, you begin to expand. Slowly, steadily. You hold more, you see more, you soften more. And in that expansion, the fear doesn't vanish, but it loses its power to define you. Each quality is a practice because it takes repetition. You're retraining the mind. If you've spent years responding to anxiety with judgment, then kindness will feel unfamiliar at first. If you've spent years trying to control emotion, then compassion will feel like surrender. If your attention has always been consumed by your own problems, then joy for others might feel irrelevant. If you've always reacted to highs and lows, then equanimity might feel flat. But all of these are signs that something is shifting, that new pathways are forming. You can develop these qualities in formal meditation by repeating phrases, by bringing people to mind, by observing your own responses. But you can also develop them in daily life. When you notice tension rising, pause, offer kindness. When you see someone struggling, offer compassion. When you hear good news, offer joy. When things change, return to balance. These are not big acts, but they are consistent ones, and over time, they become your natural way of meeting the world. What you're building is not just emotional strength, it's the kind of courage that allows you to live fully, even in the face of uncertainty. The lion's roar is not a sound of aggression. It's the voice of someone who is not afraid to be awake, not afraid to feel, not afraid to stay. That roar can be silent, it can be soft, but it's unmistakable. It's what rises in the heart when you stop avoiding your experience and meet it with care. This is the path that transforms anxiety, not by removing it, but by meeting it so skillfully, so openly, that it has nowhere left to hide. And once fear is seen without flinching, it begins to lose its hold. Once you stop reaching for better feelings, and begin meeting each moment as it is, without needing it to transform, you discover something surprising. Fear doesn't go away, but it also doesn't hold the same weight. It stops being a wall and becomes a door. Not a door you have to break through, but one you can walk up to, stand in front of, and stay with. That staying is not force. It's not resistance. It's a different kind of strength, one that doesn't come from pushing harder, but from opening wider. This strength is not built on toughness, it's rooted in the heart. And the Buddha taught that the most powerful kind of courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of love, compassion, joy for others, and calm balance. These four inner qualities, metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha, are known as the Brahma Viharas, or the divine abodes. They are not escapes from life's intensity. They are the foundation from which you can face it with steadiness. These qualities are not emotional decorations. They are practices, disciplines, and more than that, they are antidotes. Each one transforms how fear operates in the mind. They take what feels overwhelming and make it workable, not because the fear goes away, but because you're no longer facing it alone. You're meeting it with the whole heart. Metta, or loving kindness, is not about pretending everything is okay. It's about inclining the heart toward care, even in the face of fear. When anxiety arises, the instinct is often to fight it or to collapse into it. But when you meet anxiety with kindness, you stop treating it as the enemy. You begin to understand that fear is not bad. It's part of your sensitivity, your wiring, your history. It's a messenger, not a flaw. Kindness turns the emotional environment into one that can hold discomfort without judgment. When you say, "May I be safe, may I be well," you are not casting a spell. You are creating space. You are reminding yourself that even here, in this unsettled moment, you deserve gentleness. That reminder changes how you breathe, how you sit, how you treat yourself. And when fear feels seen, not attacked, it starts to soften. Karuna, or compassion, is what arises when you see suffering clearly and respond with care. But real compassion begins with yourself, especially when fear shows up. Often, people judge their own anxiety. They feel ashamed. They think it means they're weak, broken, or not far enough along the path. But compassion says, this too is worthy of care. It doesn't wait for the pain to improve before offering warmth. Practicing compassion means being honest about where it hurts, without collapse, without dramatizing, without turning pain into identity. Just the clear recognition that something here is tender, and that tenderness deserves to be met with presence. When you do this regularly, something changes in your system. Fear still arises, but it's not layered with shame. It's not weaponized by self-judgment. You create the conditions for healing simply by not turning away. Mudita, or empathetic joy, seems at first to have little to do with fear, but it's one of the most powerful supports in difficult times. Fear narrows the mind. It pulls attention inward. It creates the illusion that you're alone. Joy for others opens the field again. When you learn to celebrate someone else's peace, someone else's happiness, someone else's success, you remind yourself that goodness is still possible, right now, even in the middle of your struggle. This practice is not about comparison. It's not about denying your pain. It's about expanding your awareness beyond the tight grip of self-focus. Fear often thrives in isolation. Joy for others breaks that isolation without needing to fix anything. You're not using someone else's joy to escape your discomfort. You're using it to reconnect with life. This kind of joy is not loud or fake. It's quiet, real, and deeply healing. Then there's upekkha, equanimity. This is the steady heart, the capacity to stay centered while everything moves around you. Equanimity doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being controlled by every wave. You see pain, you see joy, you see change, and you meet them all with the same inner balance. You don't shut down. You don't get pulled into extremes. You stay present. That presence is not passive. It's deeply alive. Practicing equanimity helps when fear tells you that you can't handle what's coming, because fear loves to live in the future. It asks, what if? What if it gets worse? What if I can't cope? But equanimity brings you back. Right now, this breath, this sensation, this thought, just this. And even if it's hard, you begin to learn that difficulty doesn't mean disaster, that you don't need to feel perfect to be okay. These 4 qualities are called divine abodes because they are places the heart can live, not occasionally visit, but dwell in. They're not goals to reach. They're foundations to return to. And when they are developed, they create the conditions for true courage. Not the courage to fight through life, but the courage to stay open to it, to feel everything without being ruled by anything. In fear, the instinct is often to shrink, to close down, to make the world smaller. But with the Brahma Viharas, you begin to expand. Slowly, steadily, you hold more, you see more, you soften more. And in that expansion, the fear doesn't vanish, but it loses its power to define you. Each quality is a practice because it takes repetition. You're retraining the mind. If you've spent years responding to anxiety with judgment, then kindness will feel unfamiliar at first. If you've spent years trying to control emotion, then compassion will feel like surrender. If your attention has always been consumed by your own problems, then joy for others might feel irrelevant. If you've always reacted to highs and lows, then equanimity might feel flat. But all of these are signs that something is shifting, that new pathways are forming. You can develop these qualities in formal meditation, by repeating phrases, by bringing people to mind, by observing your own responses, but you can also develop them in daily life. When you notice tension rising, pause, offer kindness. When you see someone struggling, offer compassion. When you hear good news, offer joy. When things change, return to balance. These are not big acts, but they are consistent ones, and over time, they become your natural way of meeting the world. What you're building is not just emotional strength, it's the kind of courage that allows you to live fully, even in the face of uncertainty. The lion's roar is not a sound of aggression, it's the voice of someone who is not afraid to be awake, not afraid to feel, not afraid to stay. That roar can be silent, it can be soft, but it's unmistakable. It's what rises in the heart when you stop avoiding your experience and meet it with care. This is the path that transforms anxiety, not by removing it, but by meeting it so skillfully, so openly, that it has nowhere left to hide. And once fear is seen without flinching, it begins to lose its hold. Once the heart begins to rest in qualities like kindness, compassion, and equanimity, a new kind of strength becomes available. Not a sharp or loud strength, but a steady presence. You stop hiding from your experience. You stop fighting your feelings. You begin to meet the world from a place of care rather than control. But even in that clarity, there are days when staying grounded is difficult, moments when inner courage feels far away. That's when something else becomes essential, not as a technique, but as a living, breathing support. Kalyana Mitata, noble friendship. The Buddha called noble friendship not a part of the path, but the whole of the path. Because no matter how much inner work you do, there are times when being alone with your mind becomes overwhelming. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because healing, insight, and transformation were never meant to happen in isolation. When fear closes in, the presence of someone who sees clearly can steady what you can't hold alone. Spiritual friendship is not built on entertainment, convenience, or comfort. It's built on shared values, on mutual respect, on honesty that comes without cruelty, and warmth that comes without attachment. These relationships are rare, not because they are impossible, but because they require both people to be walking the path sincerely. A noble friend is someone who reminds you of what matters, not by correcting you, but by embodying what you've forgotten in the moment. Anxiety thrives in disconnection. It builds in silence, in secrecy, in the corners of the mind where no one else sees. The inner critic grows stronger when there's no other voice to challenge it. But a wise friend offers perspective, not by fixing, but by reflecting. They see your fear and don't flinch. They see your doubt and don't turn away. Their presence alone is a kind of medicine. It says, without needing to be said, "You're not alone." This kind of friendship doesn't depend on long conversations or constant contact. It can be quiet, even distant, but it carries something sacred, a commitment to truth and to each other's growth. Sometimes the most powerful moment is just a pause, a glance, a silence where nothing needs to be explained. The anxiety that once felt like yours alone now lives in a wider space. It's shared, not as a burden, but as something human. Noble friends are also mirrors. They reflect your blind spots, not to judge, but to help you see. They help you notice the stories you tell yourself, the patterns you fall into, the fears you mistake for facts. And because you trust them, their words land differently. You're not being criticized. You're being guided, held to a higher view, gently. A spiritual friend doesn't comfort you with fantasy. They don't promise life will get easier. What they offer is more grounded. They remind you that you can meet life as it is, that even in the middle of confusion, you are still capable of presence, still able to choose your response, still part of a path that matters. This kind of support changes the internal landscape. You begin to internalize their voice. In moments when anxiety rises and your mind wants to spiral, you remember what they would say, not to dismiss the fear, but to anchor you. Over time, your inner dialogue shifts, from criticism to compassion, from panic to patience. The kindness you've received begins to live in you. It's not just the friend that's healing, it's the friendship. The relationship itself becomes a space of safety. Not safety from difficulty, but safety to face difficulty without collapsing. You learn to be seen without performing, to be heard without defending, to be supported without being dependent. That balance is rare and deeply restorative. Kalyana Mittata also helps you grow by creating a kind of accountability, not pressure, but a steady encouragement. A friend who reminds you of your intentions when you forget, who nudges you back to practice when you drift, who holds your highest self in view when you get lost in self-doubt, not because they're better, but because they care. This support becomes especially important when the mind turns inward in destructive ways. When anxiety feeds thoughts like, "I'm not enough, I'll never get through this, something is wrong with me," a spiritual friend brings light to that darkness. They remind you that even your worst moment is part of the path, that growth is not a straight line, that healing doesn't require perfection, only presence. And as you receive this kind of support, something else awakens, the wish to offer it. You begin to ask not only who your friends are, but how you can be that kind of friend. You start listening more deeply, showing up more fully. You learn to sit with others in their fear without needing to fix it, to offer clarity without superiority, to meet pain with presence instead of pity. This turns the entire relationship into a form of practice, not separate from meditation, but an extension of it. You're not just watching your breath, you're watching your words, your reactions, your intentions. Friendship becomes a space where Dhamma is lived, not just studied. In times of uncertainty, noble friendship becomes an anchor, a reminder that the path is not walked alone. Even the Buddha did not teach in isolation. He gathered a community. He encouraged connection, because he understood that transformation happens in relationship, that clarity grows through reflection, that the heart strengthens in shared purpose. The anxiety that once felt overwhelming now has somewhere to land. Not to be solved, but to be witnessed. Not to be explained away, but to be held. When that happens, your nervous system responds. Your breath deepens. Your chest softens. Your grip loosens. Not because the fear is gone, but because you're no longer carrying it alone. Friendship also brings joy, often overlooked in spiritual practice. The simple joy of connection, of laughter, of being reminded that life is not only serious, that growth can include lightness, that the path doesn't have to be lonely. This kind of companionship doesn't happen by accident. It's cultivated. It grows from honesty, humility, and care. It requires you to show up, to be real, to let others see you, not just when you're strong, but also when you're afraid. That vulnerability is not a weakness. It's the soil where real connection grows. Kalyana Mittata invites you to choose your companions with care, not just for comfort, but for truth. Who around you helps you remember your values? Who encourages you to stay awake when it would be easier to numb out? Who holds your heart without shrinking from its weight? And just as importantly, who do you offer that to? Because this is not about taking, it's about mutual refuge, a shared effort to walk with integrity, to meet life with honesty, to hold space for what's difficult, and to celebrate what's beautiful, even in the midst of it. This is how anxiety begins to lose its grip. Not all at once, not because it disappears, but because your sense of self expands. You are no longer just the one who suffers, you are also the one who connects, who listens, who is listened to. You are part of something larger than fear. And from this place of shared strength, you begin to face even the deepest truths, not with dread, but with readiness. Because now you know you are not walking alone. Now you know your path is not just personal, it is relational, rooted in care, held in presence, strengthened by love. When friendship steadies the heart and gives you space to breathe, something deeper starts to rise to the surface, something that doesn't come from fear alone, but from the way we experience time itself. Anxiety is not only about what's happening now. It's often a result of being pulled by the past or pushed by the future. You may not even realize it's happening. A memory returns and the body tenses. A thought about tomorrow appears and the chest tightens. This subtle pressure builds quietly. The more time you spend outside of the present, the less grounded you feel. You're not lost in space. You're lost in time. Buddhism points to a simple but transformative truth. All things are impermanent. Everything arises and passes. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, situations, none of it stays. This truth is not philosophical. It's a direct observation. The breath changes, the mood shifts, the seasons turn, and yet much of anxiety comes from not accepting this reality. The mind clings to moments that are already gone or ones that haven't yet arrived. And in that grasping, unease grows. Clinging to the past is often subtle. It's not always dramatic memories or unresolved trauma. Sometimes it's just reliving a conversation, regretting a decision, replaying a moment you wish had gone differently. The mind returns to these events and acts as if thinking about them might somehow change them. But the past cannot be reshaped. What happened has already flowed into memory. The suffering comes not from the event itself, but from the refusal to let it rest. Even good memories can cause tension. Nostalgia can turn into longing. The thought, "Those were better times," creates a sense that something important has been lost. But no moment can be preserved. Trying to hold the past still is like trying to catch water with your hands. The harder you try, the more it slips away. Freedom comes not from forgetting, but from recognizing that the past is a mental formation arising in the present. It is a thought. It is not now. The same is true for the future. Anticipation often feels productive, as if worrying might help you prepare. But what most people call preparation is often fear in disguise. You imagine the worst-case scenario and rehearse how to survive it. You project a version of yourself into situations that don't exist and then panic about how to respond. But the future cannot be visited. It lives only in imagination, and no amount of thinking will guarantee control. What you fear about the future is often not the event itself, but your belief that you won't be able to handle it. You forget that the strength to meet any moment doesn't come from rehearsing, it comes from presence. When the moment actually arrives, you are not in it alone. You bring all of your training, your awareness, your calm. But that strength is built here, not there, in this breath, not in the imagined one. One of the reasons impermanence is such a powerful teaching is because it reveals the futility of clinging. You begin to see that everything you're afraid of losing was never yours to hold. This doesn't make life meaningless, it makes it precious. When you know something is temporary, you meet it with more care, more honesty, more gratitude. You don't waste time waiting for the perfect moment. You live in the moment you have. Presence is not a vague idea, It is an active return. Every time the mind leaves the now, you gently guide it back to the feeling of the breath, to the weight of your body, to the sounds around you, to the simplicity of sensation. This returning is the practice, not as a technique to escape pain, but as a way to stop adding to it. When you are here, anxiety has less space to grow. You might notice that even small tasks become easier when approached from presence. Washing dishes, brushing your teeth, walking down the street. When fully engaged, they become anchoring. Not because the activity is special, but because you are no longer pulled in two directions. You are not doing one thing while thinking about another. This coherence between attention and action is what dissolves fragmentation. And fragmentation is the root of much inner tension. The fear of impermanence often shows up in relationships. You don't want the good times to end. You fear the pain of separation. You struggle to accept that even the deepest bonds will eventually change. But holding on tightly does not stop change. It only adds fear to love. When you remember that everything is changing, you begin to love more freely. You stop trying to keep people the same. You let them grow, and you let yourself grow with them. This truth also changes how you relate to suffering. Pain feels unbearable when it feels endless. But when you know it's impermanent, you don't panic. You meet it like a storm, intense but passing. You stay with it, breathe with it, and watch it shift. It always shifts. Knowing this doesn't make the pain disappear, but it makes it bearable. Because now you're not adding resistance, you're just staying present. The more you practice this, the more time begins to feel different. Not as a trap, but as something flexible. You stop measuring your life only in years, plans, and deadlines. You begin to live in moments. You start to trust that the only time you can ever truly live is now. Not the past version of yourself, not the imagined future version, but the one sitting here, breathing this breath. This perspective also helps with identity. Who you were is not who you are. Who you will be is not who you need to become. The mind often ties anxiety to a fixed idea of self. I've always been like this. What if I never change? But identity is not solid. You are always unfolding, always responding, always becoming. This is why presence is not only healing, it is truthful. It brings you face to face with what's real, not what's rehearsed. To live in the present does not mean you forget your past or ignore your future. It means you don't live in them. You use the past to learn, not to linger. You use the future to plan, not to panic. The rest of your attention is offered to what is directly in front of you. This requires discipline. It requires patience. It requires letting go of the comfort of distraction. Distraction often feels easier than presence. Scrolling, fantasizing, reliving, projecting, all of it gives the illusion of movement, but it drains your energy. What's difficult about presence is not the moment itself. It's the mind's resistance to the simplicity of now. Because when there's nothing to solve, nowhere to run, the mind feels exposed. But in that exposure is your true strength. You begin to sense that awareness itself is timeless, that beneath the changing forms, thoughts, emotions, sensations, there is something still, something that doesn't age, doesn't chase, doesn't flinch. This awareness is not passive, it's intimate. It holds each moment with care, even as that moment slips away. When you rest in that kind of presence, anxiety loses its foundation, because there is nothing left to escape. This is not about doing less. It's about being more fully with whatever you do. Whether it's working, resting, speaking, or sitting in silence, the question is not how much you accomplish. The question is how fully you show up. Presence doesn't slow you down. It removes the extra weight, the inner commentary, the scattered attention. What's left is clarity. And in that clarity, peace becomes possible. Not because everything goes your way, but because you are no longer divided. You are not a mind in one place and a body in another. You are whole, here, breathing, enough. Understanding impermanence also brings forgiveness. When you realize that everyone is changing, including those who hurt you, it becomes easier to let go of resentment. You stop freezing people in time. You give yourself and others the space to be more than your worst moment. This doesn't mean forgetting harm. It means remembering that no one, including you, is stuck forever. That memory is not destiny. That healing is not linear. This kind of forgiveness eases anxiety that's rooted in guilt or shame. You stop being afraid of your past because you stop defining yourself by it. You carry lessons, not labels, and you learn to meet each new moment not as a repeat of the last, but as a new beginning. Presence also deepens gratitude. When you're not rushing toward the next thing or trapped in regret, you begin to notice small joys. The warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of the breath, the sound of leaves. None of these last, but that's what makes them precious. You don't need them to stay. You only need to see them while they're here. Living with awareness of impermanence is not grim. It's freeing. It helps you let go of perfectionism, comparison, and urgency. You don't need to hold it all. You don't need to fix everything at once. You just need to be with what's here. When the mind stops chasing the past and fearing the future, and presence becomes your resting place, a deeper shift begins to unfold. You realize that much of the tension in your body and confusion in your thoughts hasn't come from one particular moment, but from the sheer amount of noise you've been carrying. Not just external noise, but internal commentary, a constant stream of explaining, analyzing, planning, and reacting. And when that stream pauses, even for a moment, what arises isn't absence, it's relief. That relief is the beginning of something powerful, noble silence. Not just the act of not speaking, but the deliberate stepping away from mental clutter. A sacred kind of stillness that calms the nervous system, clears emotional fog, and reconnects you with the part of yourself that isn't trying to be anyone or solve anything. In the Buddhist tradition, noble silence isn't about retreating from life. It's about entering life with your full attention. Silence is often misunderstood as a lack. But it's not what's missing. It's what makes space for what's real. When speech ceases, so does the need to perform. You stop shaping yourself for others. You stop filling the air out of habit. You begin to notice what drives your urge to speak: discomfort, insecurity, the fear of not being seen. And when you refrain, those layers start to loosen. You learn to rest in presence without needing to control how others perceive it. This kind of silence is especially healing for anxiety because it meets the nervous system where words cannot. Many anxious responses begin long before a thought forms. The breath shortens. The body tightens. Speech often becomes faster, louder, more urgent. But in silence, the entire tempo slows. You begin to notice the rhythm of your breath, the weight of your body, the quiet hum beneath the surface. This awareness creates regulation, not by force, but by allowing your body to return to its natural pace. Silence also gives the mind room to reset. Constant thinking drains energy. Even useful thoughts become overwhelming when they don't stop. The mind needs pauses the same way the body needs rest. In silence, you stop adding more input, and in that space, you can begin to notice what's been sitting there, unresolved. Old emotions that never had time to settle, questions you've been avoiding, pain you've been covering with distraction. Silence lets it rise, but gently, in its own time. Noble silence is not passive, it's intentional. You're not just being quiet, you're being aware. You're listening, not to content, but to the quality of presence. This listening teaches you to attune to your own internal signals, to sense when you're moving too fast, when you're speaking from fear, when you're reaching for control. Over time, that sensitivity becomes your compass. It helps you recognize what your system needs before anxiety takes hold. This is especially important in a world where constant communication is expected. You are flooded with messages, opinions, alerts, and noise. The pressure to respond, to be available, to stay informed can make silence feel unnatural. But that's exactly why it's necessary. Silence reclaims your attention. It reminds you that your worth is not measured by how much you say or how quickly you react. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to be still. In Buddhist monastic settings, noble silence is a regular practice. Entire days or weeks may pass without verbal communication. But this isn't about cold withdrawal. It's about deep listening. Participants don't become distant. They become more present. Eye contact becomes more meaningful. Movements more mindful. Connection more honest. This depth is possible because without the buffer of words, people are less guarded. There is no script, just presence. You don't need to live in a monastery to benefit from this. Even short periods of intentional silence can change your state. Begin by choosing a time, 10 minutes, an hour, a morning, where you don't speak and don't consume information. Sit or walk in silence. Let your senses open. Feel your breath, your heartbeat, your surroundings. The goal is not to empty your mind. It's to stop feeding it. Let the mind unwind on its own. In these moments, you'll likely notice how uncomfortable silence can feel at first. The mind will reach for stimulation. It may produce restlessness, boredom, even fear. That's part of the process. What you're feeling is the body learning how to settle. The same way water becomes clear when it stops being stirred. If you stay with it, without trying to fix or escape it, clarity returns. One of the most important outcomes of noble silence is the softening of reactivity. When you're not constantly responding to others or your own thoughts, you create space between trigger and reaction. You begin to recognize your habitual patterns, the ways you interrupt silence because of discomfort, the ways you use words to defend, distract, or dominate. This awareness isn't about shame, it's about choice. Once you see the pattern, you no longer have to follow it. Silence also reveals what actually nourishes you. Without the noise, you notice the difference between habit and need. You realize that some conversations leave you more tired than connected, that some opinions you chase don't align with your values, that much of your mental energy is spent rehearsing dialogues that never happen. In silence, these tendencies become clear, not to criticize yourself, but to see where your attention has been going. For people with anxiety, silence can become a safe place, not because it avoids life, but because it gives the nervous system what it rarely receives: permission to rest. When you're no longer performing for others or even for yourself, the body can begin to release the constant alertness it's been holding. This regulation is not instant, but it's real. Every moment of silence teaches your system that stillness is not dangerous, that calm does not mean collapse. Over time, noble silence deepens your trust in your own presence. You no longer need to prove your insight through words. You no longer need to process every emotion out loud. You begin to sense that stillness is not the opposite of expression. It's the ground from which true expression arises. Your words become fewer, but carry more weight. Your actions come from a place of calm rather than urgency. This doesn't mean silence is always the answer. There are times when words are necessary to comfort, to clarify, to protect. But when you practice silence regularly, your speech becomes more intentional. You speak with awareness, not out of compulsion. You know when to say something, and just as importantly, when not to. Even in relationships, silence can be transformative. Being with someone without needing to talk builds trust. It teaches both people that connection doesn't require constant commentary. That presence alone can be enough. This can be deeply healing, especially for those who grew up in environments where silence was filled with tension or avoidance. Noble silence is not that. It is not absence. It is attention without pressure. This kind of silence also supports deeper meditation. When you stop talking externally, it becomes easier to quiet the internal dialogue. When you're not preparing your next sentence or replaying the last one, the mind has room to breathe. You begin to hear the subtle layers of thought, the ones that drive your anxiety without being loud, and as you sit with them, they soften. You don't need to solve them, you just stop feeding them. Silence is not a break from practice. It is the practice. It teaches presence more directly than any technique, because it removes everything unnecessary and leaves only what's essential. You, this moment, this breath, and that is more than enough. When you begin to value silence, you also become more sensitive to the kinds of noise you invite into your life. You choose your conversations with more care. You protect your attention more wisely. You stop filling space just because it's empty. And in that protection, anxiety has less room to grow. At its deepest level, noble silence becomes sacred, not as a ritual, but as a return to your natural state before thought, before identity, before words. In that stillness, there's nothing to perform, nothing to prove, just being, breathing, enough. When silence becomes familiar, when it no longer feels like absence but presence, something shifts. You stop needing to fill space. You stop reacting to every ripple in the mind. The noise that once demanded attention begins to quiet on its own. And within that stillness, a deeper clarity emerges. one that doesn't come from thinking, but from seeing. From this grounded space, you're no longer running. And now, there is something waiting to be faced, something that's always been close, always been shaping your reactions from the shadows. It is fear, not as an idea, but as a felt experience. And for the first time, you're not turning away. The practice now is not escape, not avoidance, and not suppression. It's a steady, honest turning toward what has been uncomfortable for so long, not to analyze it, not to destroy it, but to see it as it really is. This is the heart of insight meditation, to meet experience directly, with awareness sharp and soft at the same time. And when that awareness meets fear without resistance, transformation begins. Fear often comes disguised. Sometimes it wears the mask of anger, irritability, restlessness, or urgency. Sometimes it shows up as mental stories that seem logical but carry a quiet panic underneath. Sometimes it's in the body, a tight chest, a shaky hand, a cold knot in the stomach. It's easy to respond to these signals by trying to make them go away. But avoidance doesn't resolve fear, it strengthens it, because what you avoid becomes larger in the dark. Turning toward fear means you stop fueling the illusion that it is too big for you. You pause, you stay, you bring awareness to the physical sensations that arise. And instead of reacting, you observe. You don't try to explain the fear, you don't argue with it, you don't look for its root or its reason, you just feel it as it is. Sensation, movement, energy, insight. Meditation works because it brings the mind into direct contact with what's happening now. You sit or lie down, you bring your attention to the body, and when fear arises, you note it. You don't run. You don't get pulled into the storyline it offers. You stay with the breath or with the area of the body where the fear is strongest. The mind might want to escape. It might want to solve. That's okay. You return, again and again, not with force, but with interest. This practice helps you see that fear is not one thing. It's a sequence. First, a sensation, then a thought, then another sensation in response to that thought. A wave, but every wave has a crest and a fall. When you stop adding new fear to the wave by resisting, judging, or running, it begins to dissolve. The power of this approach lies in its simplicity. You are not trying to fix fear. You are simply refusing to leave it unattended. You are sitting with the monster, not to fight it, but to see that it may not be a monster after all. Fear loses its shape when looked at directly. It starts to become what it truly is: energy moving through the nervous system, conditioned by experience, asking to be felt, not fed. It is essential in this practice to include the body. Insight. Meditation is not just watching thoughts, it's noticing how thoughts impact breath, posture, heart rate, and tension. Fear is not abstract. It is deeply physical. So you bring your awareness to the jaw that tightens, the shoulders that lift, the belly that hardens. You breathe into those places, not to force them to relax, but to acknowledge them. Awareness is an invitation, not a demand. Sometimes what you find beneath the surface of fear is sadness. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's exhaustion. Fear often guards these deeper emotions because they feel too vulnerable. But when you stay present, when you don't react or run, what was buried starts to emerge. This can be intense, but it's not harmful. What's harmful is carrying those emotions unexamined for years. Presence allows what's stuck to move again. Insight doesn't always come as a big realization. Often, it comes as a small shift in how you relate. The fear rises, and for the first time, you don't tighten. You don't collapse. You don't add a story. You simply breathe. And that moment is everything. That is where the healing begins, not by changing the fear, but by changing your posture toward it. This practice also reveals how often fear is about what might happen, not what is happening. You begin to notice that the worst of your fear lives in anticipation. It projects scenarios, consequences, failures, and losses. But when you return to what's actually here, a pulsing heart, a sensation in the throat, you see that this moment is survivable. Even when it's uncomfortable, it is manageable. Presence turns imagined catastrophe into a series of manageable now moments. Meditating on fear doesn't make you passive, it makes you responsive. Because now your actions come from clarity, not panic. You stop reacting automatically. You begin choosing your next step, not out of desperation, but out of wisdom. This changes how you speak, how you set boundaries, how you care for yourself and others. And in facing fear, you develop a kind of quiet confidence. Not the absence of fear, but the knowing that you can meet fear without abandoning yourself. This confidence grows each time you stay, each time you breathe through the discomfort, each time you remember that the wave passes. You stop being afraid of fear itself. This doesn't mean you stop being human. Fear will still arise. It's part of life, but it no longer controls you. You stop avoiding experiences because they might be uncomfortable. You stop holding back your truth because you're afraid of judgment. You stop making your safety dependent on controlling everything around you. This is not recklessness, it's freedom. Insight. Meditation is not about achieving a state. It's about developing the capacity to stay with any state. This includes fear, especially fear, because fear is often the doorway to your deepest growth. When you stop turning away, you discover a strength that was never gone, only covered by layers of habit and avoidance. This practice is not quick. It requires patience, gentleness, repetition. Some days, fear will feel overwhelming. Other days, distant. The key is not to measure success by how much fear goes away, but by how consistently you show up to meet it. Every moment you stay is a moment of healing. Every breath you take in presence is a step toward wholeness. And this presence doesn't just help you, it helps others. Because the more you can hold your own fear without collapsing, the more you can hold space for others in their moments of distress. You stop needing to fix them. You start offering presence instead of solutions, and that presence is often the greatest gift you can give. This turning toward fear also changes your relationship to joy. Because when you stop avoiding difficult emotions, you become more open to all emotions. You stop numbing. You start feeling. You begin to taste joy, not as something to grasp, but as something to receive. And it becomes richer because it's no longer limited by the fear of its loss. Fear loses power when it is met with stillness. Not the stillness of stiffness, but the stillness of staying, the stillness of clarity, the stillness that says, I am here and I am not leaving. That is the lion's heart, not because it roars, but because it remains. Meditation helps reveal this pattern because it brings stillness. And in stillness, the pressure to perform starts to become visible. When you stop doing, you start feeling. And what arises may not be peace. It may be restlessness, self-judgment, or guilt. The mind begins to churn. Shouldn't I be doing something? Is this practice working? Am I doing it right? These questions don't come from sincerity. They come from the craving to get it right, to be worthy, to earn peace. This is where insight begins. You start to ask deeper questions. Why am I doing this? What am I hoping to prove? What would it mean if I didn't live up to my own standard? These questions can be uncomfortable, but they're necessary. Because until you see the attachment to being good, you won't notice how often it drives your actions. You'll continue to act with tightness, not freedom. Letting go of this attachment doesn't mean you stop doing good. It means you stop doing it from fear. You stop measuring your worth by it. You stop needing the world to reflect your value back to you. Instead, goodness becomes a natural expression of clarity. You help when it's needed. You rest when it's time. You speak up when it's true. Not because you're building an identity, but because you're responding to life as it is. To work with this anxiety, start with noticing how often you seek reassurance, whether in conversation, in feedback, or even in your thoughts. Notice the hunger for affirmation, the moments when a compliment soothes something deeper, or when criticism unravels your peace. Begin to name this tendency without judging it. This is seeking. This is clinging. This is fear. Awareness weakens the grip. Over time, you begin to care less about how you're seen and more about how you're being. The Buddha taught that even attachment to virtue can become a trap. If your path becomes a source of pride, a way to feel superior or more advanced, you've stepped away from the heart of the teaching. True virtue is humble. It doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't require a witness. It's enough to do what is skillful without needing credit. That's the essence of inner freedom. Living from this place allows you to make mistakes without collapsing. You no longer hold the belief that a single failure undoes your goodness. You can apologize without self-hate. You can learn without shame. You begin to hold yourself with the same compassion you've offered to others, because now your worth is not tied to your reputation. It's rooted in awareness, in honesty, in the intention to keep growing. This also allows you to stop hiding. The pressure to be good often leads to suppression. You hide your anger, your doubt, your grief. You present only what is acceptable. But healing comes through wholeness, not image. You don't become free by perfecting yourself. You become free by including all of yourself, even the parts that feel unworthy. You may still feel fear. You may still feel the urge to prove. That's okay. The work is not to erase the impulse. It's to stop obeying it. When you feel the need to please, pause. When you feel the urge to defend your image, breathe. When you notice yourself reacting to criticism, step back and feel the body. These small acts of awareness are powerful. They interrupt the habit of self-protection and open the door to deeper truth. In daily life, practice doing good without leaving a trail. Help someone anonymously. Say something kind without waiting for a thank you. Let go of the need to be seen and instead notice how it feels to simply act from sincerity. At first, the ego may protest. It wants to be recognized. But if you stay with the feeling, something else appears, a quiet joy that isn't dependent on anyone's approval. That joy is your compass. It tells you when you're aligned, not with your image, but with your values. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It says, yes, this is true. Yes, this is enough. And when you begin to trust that voice, the anxiety around performance starts to fade. This shift also helps you relate more honestly to others. You stop comparing goodness. You stop measuring progress. You start seeing people as fellow travelers, not competitors. You celebrate their efforts without needing to match them. You listen without waiting to speak. You connect without needing to be seen as the most helpful or wise. This brings ease to your relationships. A natural, spacious love that doesn't need to prove anything. In time, the attachment to being good softens into something more honest. The desire to be real, to be present, to be kind without pressure, to act with integrity even when no one is watching. This is the freedom that anxiety cannot touch, because it doesn't rely on results. It doesn't fear failure. It doesn't cling to approval. It simply flows from a heart that has nothing left to defend. When the need to be good no longer holds you in its grip, and when your actions begin to flow from a place of integrity rather than image, the inner world starts to feel more spacious. The constant evaluation softens. The fear of failure fades into something more workable, but even after that softening, there often remains a quieter, deeper layer of anxiety, one that can't be resolved through performance or praise, control or perfection. It's the fear that everything could end, that all your efforts, your relationships, your identity could be erased in a moment. Beneath so much striving lies this core truth: the fear of death. This fear is not always dramatic. Often, it shows up in subtle ways, in the urge to manage every detail, in the resistance to letting go, in the panic that rises when plans don't work out. It's in the craving for certainty, the grasping for control, the tension in the jaw or chest when things feel unpredictable. At its root, much of this behavior is about avoiding the reality that nothing is permanent, that everything is passing, that your time is limited. And yet, the Buddha didn't teach us to turn away from this truth. He taught us to turn toward it with mindfulness, not as something grim, but as a practice of liberation. Maranasati, or mindfulness of death, is not about being morbid. It's about remembering what's true. Every day, every breath, every choice happens within the frame of impermanence. When you forget that, you begin to live as if you have endless time. You postpone what matters. You grip what doesn't. You measure your days by productivity instead of presence. But when you remember that death is certain and the time of death is uncertain, clarity returns. Life becomes immediate. Decisions become simpler. Peace becomes more accessible because your attention shifts from trying to control outcomes to appreciating what is here now. This contemplation is not about thinking constantly about death. It's about reflecting regularly on the fact that death is part of your life. Just as breath comes and goes, so does everything else. This reflection doesn't create fear. It helps dissolve the fear that comes from clinging to what cannot be kept. It helps you loosen your grip on control, not because you're giving up, but because you're waking up. Control is often a coping mechanism for the fear of loss. If you can manage everything, you believe you can delay pain. But control is never complete. Plans change. Bodies age. Loved ones go. And each time something slips through your fingers, anxiety returns. The mind asks, "What if I lose this? What if this ends?" But mindfulness of death answers gently, "It will end." That's not a threat. That's a reminder. It's a reminder to cherish, to release, to live. Maranasati is not a dramatic meditation. It can be as simple as pausing once a day and saying to yourself, "This breath could be my last." Not to scare yourself, but to center yourself, to bring the mind back to what matters. When you practice this sincerely, it brings a certain gravity, not heaviness, but depth. You stop wasting energy on things that don't matter. You stop putting off your values. You start living as if each day counts, because it does. This contemplation also helps you deal with regret. When you know that life is short, you don't cling to mistakes. You learn, you apologize, you forgive. You don't carry the burden of needing to be perfect. You carry the intention to be honest, to be kind, to be awake. And when you fall short, you begin again. Because there's no time to live in shame. There's only time to return. Fear of death is also fear of not being in control. The mind wants guarantees, but death is the one experience that cannot be managed, postponed, or restructured. And in facing this truth, something else arises: humility. Not the kind that makes you feel small, but the kind that makes you feel free. You stop trying to dominate life. You begin to cooperate with it. You begin to walk with it. This reflection can change your relationship to others. When you remember that the people you love will die, your heart softens. You stop arguing over things that don't matter. You forgive faster. You say thank you more often. You stop waiting for the perfect time to connect, because every time might be the last time. And that awareness turns even ordinary moments into sacred ones. Contemplating death also helps you see the preciousness of your own life. Not in the abstract, but in the details. The feel of your breath in the morning, the sound of someone's voice, the sensation of warm tea in your hands. These small things become vivid because you're no longer assuming you'll have them tomorrow. You're here for them now. There is also a deeper peace that comes when you stop trying to secure your legacy. Much anxiety comes from wanting to be remembered, wanting to make a mark, wanting to leave something behind. But death contemplation reminds you that all traces fade. Even the greatest monuments crumble. Even the most cherished names are forgotten. This isn't cause for despair. It's cause for release. You stop building yourself. You start living yourself fully, genuinely, without needing to be anything more than present. This practice does not lead to passivity. It leads to urgency, but a different kind. Not frantic urgency, not pressured urgency, but the urgency of intention. The urgency that says, if today is the day, let me meet it with open eyes, with an honest heart, with gratitude even for the hard things. That kind of urgency brings calm, because now you're living from truth, not fear. You don't need to force this contemplation. You can weave it gently into your life, before meals, before sleep, when waking, during meditation. A simple phrase, I will die, I don't know when, and then breathe. Feel what arises. Let it shape how you move through your day. Let it soften your grip. Over time, this becomes more than a reflection. It becomes a posture, a way of relating to life that is direct, compassionate, and free. You begin to trust that you don't need to manage everything. You begin to see that trying to guarantee security is what creates insecurity. Letting go of control doesn't lead to chaos, it leads to clarity. You also become more courageous, not fearless, but brave. Because now you're not avoiding reality, you're facing it. And in facing it, you stop wasting your strength on resistance. You use it to show up, to speak truth, to follow what feels meaningful, to rest when needed, to stay soft when it would be easier to harden. And when death does touch your life, through loss, through aging, through illness, you are not as shaken. You feel it fully. You grieve, you break open, but you don't run, because you've been practicing. You've been turning toward what most people avoid, and that turning gives you strength. This strength is not about enduring more. It's about living lighter, less control, more trust, less grasping, more being, less waiting, more presence. And in this kind of living, anxiety has no place to root itself, because you're not holding the future too tightly. You're not trying to protect a self that cannot be preserved. You are here, awake, letting go with each breath. Mindfulness of death is the clearest reminder that life is now, not later, not after everything is figured out, not when it's convenient. Now. And when you begin to live from that truth, everything becomes more vivid. Even fear loses its edge, because you're no longer pretending that life will wait for you. You've arrived. You've just traveled through more than 3 hours of Buddhist wisdom, not just ancient philosophy, but practical guidance for meeting anxiety with clarity, with courage, and with compassion. From the first moment of noticing fear to the last breath of letting go, you've explored the full path. Attention that cuts through illusion, ethics that anchor your heart, presence that frees your mind, and friendship that reminds you never walk this alone. You've seen how anxiety is not something to fight, but something to understand. It arises from habit, from identity, from craving, from forgetting what is real. And through these teachings, you've learned how to come back to this breath, to this body, to this moment, where fear loses its story and peace becomes possible. You've learned that letting go is not loss, but freedom. That silence is not emptiness, but medicine. That death is not the end, but a teacher that wakes you up to what matters most. And above all, you've seen that healing does not come from changing who you are. It comes from remembering who you are when you stop running. If this journey spoke to something deep in you, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below with the words, "Peace is my path." Let us know which part of the journey touched you most, and how you'll begin bringing these teachings into your daily life. And if you found value in this content, subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to explore together, and we'd be honored to walk the path with you. Until next time, may your mind be steady, your breath be soft, and your heart be free.